All right. I am now joined by Victor Brazone from the Plastic Pills podcast and Ethan, better known by the sobriquet Mouthy Infidel, who has a YouTube channel. I actually just looked up the name of it earlier so I could link it in the description for this video, which is named after one of my favorite philosophy papers. It's called Electrons in Love by my buddy Neil Cinnababas. So there you have it. So how you guys doing today?
Not bad. Pretty good. A little. I've had like a bit of a cold all week, but I did 3 rapid tests and apparently it's not COVID, so that's good. I'm all right. I'm drinking some ginger tea from this Zizek I would prefer not to mug. So everything's good. And also, Ben, I should say, we've known each other long enough. I feel like it's finally time for me to tell you. I don't know why I didn't correct you on this in the first place. That my last name is pronounced Brazoni, but that's okay. Everyone says Brazone, but I thought it's time to tell you.
Fair enough. It's like that old XKCD with the stick figure bride and groom, and the like stick figure priest says, and will you, Jane, and and the guy says, oh, that's it. Now I know, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, fair enough. So I thought, we are highly unusually doing this on a Friday instead of a Thursday, but I was traveling yesterday. I was on a plane. We normally would have done this, and I wanted to do this one now for a couple reasons. So one is that there's already something that's been on the books and has already had to be bumped once for next week, right? So I wasn't going to do it next week, and I wanted to do this while it was still reasonably fresh. I know this is the second very contemporary, very up to the moment, very internet-y debate that we have done very recently, and on the same topic even, because we just did the one with Vaush and Danny Bessner arguing sort of about the same thing, but not exactly. But we do try to alternate between very up to the moment, very internet-y debates and sort of old classy ones on here. So we are going to go to another old classy one next week. Nathan Robinson's on. We're going to do William F. Buckley, Christopher Hitchens. But
ooh, nice.
Yeah, right. But I did want to do this while it's still fresh.
Fair.
And thought this would be an interesting one to watch. Should also say, I think it shows something about. So this is hosted on Modern Day Debate, which is a YouTube channel I've done a bunch of stuff with. I know that Ethan has done at least one debate on there that I've seen. And I think it both captures exactly what I like about it and what's sometimes kind of like, oh god damn it, like, which is because like I'll be on there sometimes and like argue with a libertarian about capitalism or something, and they're like, and tomorrow, we're gonna do, does gravity exist? Or is this
They literally will do any topic, eh? Yeah, I think they've unironically done debates on like flat Earth a bunch of times, haven't they?
Yeah,
or a couple times at least. Yeah, for sure.
No, they have done flat Earth debates. They have done like they will. It is really, really, really no holds barred. like anything that somebody wants to come argue about, they are pretty much happy to post. They're pretty much happy to host that, right? So
yeah, they did one debate on whether there are 2 suns that I can remember. So that was,
who was arguing for yes, like
some sort of conspiracy to keep us from the truth of the 2 suns because it's too dangerous to know.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
The host seems like a nice guy, though. I don't know. Yeah.
No, the host is a very nice guy. They did the thing in the in-person deal in Texas in January. I was at that, and
he's got that radio voice too. He's got that.
He does. He's got a total radio voice. And yeah, had dinner with him. He's a lovely guy. But that sort of that whole aspect does get a little frustrating sometimes, right? Because like it feels like, oh my god, what am I doing, right? But like at the same time, I think it's actually really good, that because if you ever want to know what the argument is for something, like they've always got you. and and whatever. I mean, I've benefited from that. I'm sure there are people who, who knows? I mean, James himself in his own way may think that some stuff I think is crazy, but he's just willing to host me. Come on, say it. And it's and in particular, I thought it'd be interesting for this one just because. Okay, so that Vaush Bessner debate was more or less on should the United States be playing this role of the imperial, world hegemon, swooping into every situation like this. And, my sympathy, our sympathy was entirely on Danny's side of that, right? For saying no, right? What a move away from that. And there's lots of other, Russia, Ukraine related stuff where, I mean, look, I had a not an hour and a half ago on Colin, I had somebody call me a Putin apologist because I was, I guess because I think that, actually not 100% sure why, but maybe just because I don't think the United States should really get involved, and and they're like a cluster of positions like that I have that will often that are the kinds of things that people will respond to that way. I think I do think that the lead up to this is more complicated than just than just a sort of attempt to nothing. Yeah.
Just assert some kind of Eurasian, kind of recapturing of the Soviet Union. And I'm sure on the other side too, it's obviously more complicated than just NATO caused it, which was also the other argument going on, right? The Mearsheimer thing.
Yeah, right. And so actually, I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about that, because we talked about this a little bit on DM, but I mean, my take on that is that, I mean, I think there's some truth to that, but I also think that you have to sort out the descriptive question from the normative one. So, in other words, look, I don't think, and this is one of the things I guess that gets me called a Putin apologist, I didn't like it. I'm a very old man. I remember this. I didn't like it after 9/11 when, you had to say that, you had to deny that Al Qaeda had any goals more explicable than just hating freedom, and I don't, or that if you did deny that, then you didn't really think that it was bad that they murdered 3,000 office workers, if you thought that there was some sort of goals that made more sense than that that were underlying their actions. And similarly, I see a lot of the same slippage from causation to justification here. That and to be fair, both among people I think there aren't very many of them, but there are a few, and there are a couple in this debate. People who actually do think that it was justified, and certainly on people who think that if you say that, then you think it was justified. Which because it just seems okay, look, you can say that this isn't the sort of pure, recapture of the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire or whatever. I mean, there's some, not that there aren't some, not that everybody in the sort of Putinist hierarchy would hate that idea, right? But but that there were somewhat explicable geopolitical goals that are underlying getting into the standoff in the first place.
Sure, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think my response to the discourse, because I just noticed a lot of people on Twitter making very definitive causal claims, and they were like, oh, it happened, and I'm in a political science department at the University of Toronto, and I was saying this actually on our Plastic Pills podcast that we did on Alexander Dugin, who's this crazy Russian philosopher. Political science is a dismal science. Making I don't know if you know where that quote's from. I think I forget who it was that talked about economics as a dismal science, but political science, you can't really make definitive causal claims in it. There's just so many compounding variables, and I just think I was more responding to the confidence that I was seeing with people being oh, if it wasn't for NATO, this wouldn't have happened. And it's sure, it's an aggravating factor, but it just doesn't seem clear to me that had NATO not expanded at all, that Putin wouldn't have either installed puppet governments or done other. It's just so hard to know, and just to see the confidence on the Twitter discourse to be like, this caused it, this is like the causal mechanism. I just found it a bit dubious.
Yeah, I think I think that I agree with Ben in that I think Mearsheimer's just purely descriptive account is at least part of the story. Like I think that obviously Russia is concerned with, having NATO troops in Ukraine on its border. Obviously, Putin is concerned to some extent with having Ukraine in its sphere of orbit, both for economic reasons and for like geostrategic reasons. But I think that the descriptive account isn't the entire part of the story. And I think that's also kind of where Mearsheimer's argument comes apart, because Mearsheimer is this really hardened realist, right? And on a realist account, it seems like Putin is clearly acting irrationally. And so because Putin's acting irrationally, it's like you can't put all the blame on the West because, it wasn't reasonable to expect that we would predict Putin would react in this way, which is why pretty much all foreign policy analysts were so surprised when Putin actually invaded. And so I think that it's very hard to put as much of the blame on Ukraine as Mearsheimer wants to. But I still think that there were definitely, I think Western expansion played into it. And I think that there were like alternative courses of action that would have like minimized the risk of this invasion happening that we should have and didn't pursue.
Yeah. I think that even if the Mearsheimer stuff is like 99% true, right? That's still, I think as far as blame goes, right? You can still, full-throatedly, blame, Putin for invading, right? The analogy I always use, like if you imagine some, alternate timeline where this exact same series of events played out in Mexico with, like the Mexico was pursuing membership in the Warsaw Pact, and there was this long-running civil war in Mexico, and the government of Mexico City was perceived as really hostile to U.S. interests, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, yeah, I think it's very possible that the United States would invade Mexico in that timeline. But also, I think I would assume that we would all be marching in anti-war protests in this hypothetical, right? That's just, yeah. This is, I think, I agree that there's an element it doesn't explain, because just invading the whole country is such a batshit crazy escalation, right? Like everything up until then, like sort of created this standoff and all of the ways in which, Russia had been meddling Ukraine. Like all of that made sense in a cynical imperialist self-interest kind of way. But then like actually escalated to invading the entire country makes no sense at all. Now, I do think some people slipped way too much from that to therefore these sorts of explicable geopolitical goals about, stopping Ukraine from slipping out of the, Russian sphere of influence and all this stuff. Those can't really be the motivation because he's undermining it. And I do think there's some, there's like a logical leap there that doesn't really make sense to me, because like, yeah, I think that saying, well, what somebody's doing is undermining their goals, therefore those aren't really their goals, like only makes sense if you assume as a background premise that they're being completely rational. And I don't see any reason to assume that. I think great powers often act in crazily irrational ways that undermine their own interests, right? Like even in the most cynical imperial self-interest sense, I have no idea what we got out of the last 20 years in Afghanistan.
Yeah, totally. I do think there's a part of a different account that I find intuitively appealing, even though it's like kind of harder to measure, which is just this view that Putin himself, and actually I rewatched, I don't know if you guys have seen the Putin interviews, the Oliver Stone. It was like 4 hours of Putin interviews where he's kind of like a bit of a brown noser to Putin. But anyway, setting that aside, like it's interesting because you get to hear Putin give his story, the kind of story he wants to tell about himself and about Russia. And I do think that there is like real evidence to suggest that he feels like a kind of marginalization and sadness that Russia is not relevant the way that it used to be, right? And just like this idea of like the humiliation of a country not being relevant, right? That's not really like a rational calculation. That's more of like a cultural wish, like a desire, like a kind of fantasy, right? There's all this like libidinal energy of just like, I wish we were big the way we used to be. And I think that it's not implausible to say that some of that came into this, like, and especially when we consider that it doesn't make sense rationally. Well, that seems like a plausible kind of like temptation.
Oh,
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. Sorry, Ethan, you were going to say?
Yeah, I think that I also completely agree. I mean, I think that in a large part part of Putin's motivations probably were like status related. Like there's this country, it's a, you know, culturally and historically important Russian ally. Russia already feels marginalized, and you know, now they feel like this highly important country is being sort of removed from their sphere of orbit and integrated into a part of the world that Putin sees as his enemy. And I think that, and I think that that's in part why I like. It's hard to make the move that Mearsheimer wants to make, where he blames the West completely, just because, you know, it would be hard to predict such an like emotional, not really rational, predictable course of action. But I also think that like really what's at stake when we're talking about like blame is like, I don't really care how much you want to morally blame this country or that country. Like obviously the invasion is morally abhorrent, and obviously the US could have done things better to prevent it. And so I think that like really the what's at stake isn't like, are we the bad guys or is Russia the bad guys? What's at stake is more like, can we point to some things that we could have done better and that we can learn from going forward so that we can avoid catastrophes like in the future.
Yeah, and exactly. can I just quickly add too that, you know, that account that I was telling before, you know, I think that would have been at play with or without NATO, right? So like that's where I kind of find that the Mearsheimer story, right, like that desire to be relevant again would have been there. I think no matter what NATO would have done, there would have been an incentive from a Putin perspective to want to install Russian influential governments, whether it's indirect, into those previously Soviet bloc countries and even maybe Warsaw Pact countries. So I think, you know, assuming we accept that story about kind of Putin's psychology wanting to be relevant again, I think that would have been at play regardless of what NATO was doing.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that I think that with Ukraine in particular, as this really historically and strategically important, you know, neighbor, that, you know, that Russian, you know, governments of all kinds have thought of as part of their sphere of influence. Like, I think that Ukraine, you know, drifted out of that sphere of influence and into the West, you know, sphere would have, like, I think it's very unlikely that any Russian government, especially not one as like, you know, nationalistic and, you know, and intense and belligerent as, you know, Putin's, would have taken that line down, even if NATO wasn't in the picture. But I think Ukraine actually joining an anti-Russian military alliance is so many steps past, you know, like what they would be prepared to. In other words, like I think that some elements of this might have happened anyway, but I think with that in the picture, I think that makes it like hard not to imagine there being, maybe not the actual invasion, because again, that is such a ludicrous escalation, but certainly a lot of the stuff leading up to it, I think is very hard to imagine not happening given NATO would be in the picture. And I do think, like Branko Marcinkiewicz made this point on Colin, whatever this point a couple hours ago, that you could also say, look, would putting future NATO status on the table in negotiations have stopped things from escalating to this point? Maybe, you know, maybe not, right? I mean, maybe they wouldn't have. But damn, I mean, like, it is pretty striking that it was never tried, right? You know, like that there was never a point where, and like, you know, before the invasion or now, right? You know, when that's considered, and I have to say, like, look, ideally, I would like to live in a world where we had such powerful international institutions that they could hold even great powers to account, and like Vladimir Putin and, I don't know, Henry Kissinger, you know, would be on the dock together and, you know, in The Hague, and, you know, like standing trial for war crimes. I think right now, unfortunately, we're very far from living in a world like that. So you do have to some extent, you know, deal with the world that you're actually living in. And so given that, I do think, I mean, out of the things that seem like realistic possible outcomes of all of this, even now, right? Like, okay, one, World War III. I would rather not do that. You know, I like the world. Two, Ukraine just turns into like Iraq or Afghanistan for the next 10 or 20 years. It's just this long, drawn out, bloody quagmire. Or three, there's some kind of like negotiated political settlement. And three seems like by far the best one of those to me. And I do think that you would have to start, you know, putting issues like this onto the table. And so this gets back to my fascination with this debate, because okay, people get pissed off when I say things like what I just said, or when I say like, let's really, really, really not do the start World War III option. And I think there are a lot of things that people are way too cavalier about suggesting that would actually risk that. And I do think that I do think that Russia has, you know, somewhat explicable geopolitical goals, just not to say that this decision was rational, but also like, look, if there's an episode of The Sopranos where Tony like got into beef with Johnny Sack, and like at a certain point in the course of it, he just got so pissed off that he lashed out violently and did something that was terrible for business for the next 5 years, nobody would be like, oh, what a horrible, unrealistic episode of The Sopranos. Why would Tony do that? Like, you know, I mean, sometimes generals and politicians, you know, are people, right? You know, and they irrationally lash out to try to assert themselves in ways that undermine their original goals. But I don't think this is like the first step in a Hitlerian plan of, you know, world conquest or even really like rebuilding the whole Russian Empire. I mean, I think it's I agree with what Nathan Robinson said on Twitter. I mean, it's much more like the invasion of Iraq, you know, that it's like a stupid and destructive thing that's going to lead to horrible results for everybody involved. But like, you know, Bush never even got a chance to invade Iran, you know, right? Because it got so bogged down in Iraq. So I do think all of these things, but I mean, I normally just take it for granted that like everybody who's like minimally sane agrees that the actual invasion is like indefensible, which is why I'm fascinated to see what they're going to come up with, right?
Yeah. Are you familiar with this Has guy who's one of the debate bros here? Oh man, he's pretty deranged.
Yeah,
he has like a reputation for like yelling a lot. I haven't watched that much of his stuff, but I've just seen clips of him like screaming at people.
So I guess I was in the room with him a couple times at that thing in Texas. I didn't talk to him, but I did hear that there was a thing with Dylan Burns where he.
Ethan's responding like he knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, we're like basically there were some challenges and counter challenges to do like a boxing match, and like eventually like, and this had all been going on online in advance, and then eventually it's like, hey, let's go out to the alley right now. No, I'm not gonna do that, right? I mean, I don't want to get arrested here. You know, we can do like a legal boxing match.
Yeah, they should just split the difference and do like mutual combat, find a state where it's allowed.
Oh, fair enough. All right, we should get started.
Yeah, sounds good.
And this is specifically recognized by organizations.
Hey, everybody. Tonight we're debating the war in Ukraine, and we are starting right now with Infrared and Jackson's opening statement. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for being with us. The floor is all yours.
Okay, so when it comes to the formation of, this is the first context I want to establish. When it comes to the formation of military alliances, this actually extends beyond the bounds of the sovereignty within a state's own territory. Countries have an obligation to be cognizant of the geopolitical, geographic, and historical and civilizational realities that their own sovereignty is situated within. And this is specifically recognized by organizations like the OSCE, according to which Ukraine being a member, one country, according to its founding document at least, one country's security cannot be strengthened at the expense of the security of another state. So what the OSCE establishes is that it's not just that states are just completely, totally free to just do whatever they want in terms of making security alliances and in terms of how they construct their militaries and position themselves geopolitically. There's a very delicate balance of power and security within Europe, and everyone who's committed to actually preserving long-term peace, which is what the OSCE is actually about, has to be recognize the fact that there needs to be a balance of security. There needs to be a security architecture that ensures that there is a fair distribution of security across the continent. When this balance is tipped in one direction or the other, it creates a situation of instability and geopolitical uncertainty, and leads to the conditions that ultimately could lead to war and to conflict. So one has to keep this in mind when one is bringing up the issue of the sovereignty of states. States should have a right to self-determination, and states should have the right to be sovereign, but they should also be cognizant of the geopolitical and geographic realities within which they reside, so as to not create circumstances that upset the balance of security.
Oh, I saw somebody in the chat was confused about what the proposition being debated is. It's because it says yes or no on top. Is Russia's invasion of Ukraine justified? Which, again, they found some guys to say yes, not even close to the craziest position that somebody has gone on a modern day debate to argue for. They've done flat Earth, they've done stuff about the dinosaurs, but this is what it is tonight.
In the security architecture. So I'll give it to Jackson now.
Yeah, so the next point that I think is really important is to actually, and I would like to hear Dylan and Destiny respond to this when they talk, is to address when did this conflict begin, or if, war, when did this war begin? The war began, and they refused to call it a war. The Ukrainian government refused to call it a war for 8 years because they wanted to have IMF loans, and you can't give IMF loans to a country that's at war. But the war began after the 2014 coup that took place on the heels of the Maidan protests, which began, in all honesty, without U.S. backing. I mean, there was a plurality of people within Ukraine that were frustrated over the fact that there was not going to be EU membership for Ukraine. And I guess there was going to be a delay in the decision. And those protests began. And then eventually they decided that they were not going to take the unfair, deal that the EU offered them. They knew that these neoliberal policies that would be inflicted upon them upon the EU deal would have hurt them much more than opening up trade partnerships more with Russia would have helped them. So upon these protests, the U.S., began to infiltrate the movement. U.S. politicians began, working with agencies on the ground, U.S. front agencies on the ground, like the National Endowment for Democracy. Victoria Nuland even boasted about the fact that, they funneled $5 billion. We'll discuss the details of the U.S. involvement in the coup later on in the debate, I'm sure. But lots of money came in to these U.S. agencies on the ground to actually hijack the Maidan protests. Upon hijacking the Maidan protests, violence broke out. This was dissimilar to the 2004 color revolution that the U.S. also played a part in, surrounding the 2004 elections, which Yanukovych was also involved in. Initially reported that he won, though international Western-aligned agencies claimed that these elections were marred with corruption and discrepancies and irregularities in the vote. The election was overturned then, and Yanukovych didn't see the presidency until his second run. But after being elected, during these Maidan protests, U.S. became involved. They led a coup upon the democratically elected government of Yanukovych, and after that, coup on the democratically elected government of Yanukovych, we saw the 8-year war begin. And that's the next point I want to make. It's insane to assume that this war began, within the past 2 weeks. Everyone knows that there was shelling, there was fighting in the Donbass region. The question is, when did that begin? It began directly after the coup, thanks to the Western-aligned leader that was put into power. Now, these Western-aligned leaders that were put into power have deep ties to the, nationalist, far-right, factions, radical factions within both the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian political apparatus. There's over 80 far-right, military militias and battalions within Ukraine. Some of the most notable include, of course, the Azov battalion, which is one of the primary forces that has been waging asymmetrical warfare upon the people of Donetsk and Luhansk, who they themselves took votes to recognize their independence, which was not granted by Russia or Ukraine or Western states for many years. Though Vladimir Putin did come out and say that he respected the legality, the outcome of the elections, but he didn't actually recognize them as independent states at the time, up until just this month. So, all in all, this conflict didn't begin this week. It began during the Maidan coup. Asymmetrical warfare was waged against the people of Donetsk and Luhansk. In the past 3 years of the conflict, which is all I have been able to find data for, maybe Dylan or Destiny can provide more evidence, but according to the United Nations, 81.4% of the civilian casualties in the Donbass war came on the side of the Donbass, civilians dying there. And at the end of the day, Russia, was very, very restrained. They tried to engage in peace deals surrounding the Minsk Accord and bring peace to the region. Like it or not, think it's fair or not, he did do that for 8 years. And in that entire time, everything I just mentioned was taking place. And these Western-aligned leaders that controlled the government for different stretches of time over this have made a continued effort to try and join NATO, which Vladimir Putin has continuously said, and I agree, would be a direct threat to their security.
You got it. Thank you very much for those openings, Infrared and Jackson Hinkle. Want to let you know, folks, if it's your first time here at Modern Day Debate, we are a neutral platform hosting debates on science, religion, and politics. And second, before I kick it over to Destiny and Dylan for their opening, if you happen to have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat. 100% of super chats tonight are going to Worldwide Orphans, and you can also tag me with @ModernDayDebate in the live chat to submit a question as well. Thanks so much, Destiny and Dylan, for being with us. The floor is all yours for your openings as well.
So Putin has been saying, it's been quoted as saying, it's said multiple times, that the greatest geopolitical catastrophe in the last century has been the collapse of the Soviet Union. I think if we look at the actions of Putin, not just in Ukraine, but in other countries and other states within Russia around the world, I think we can see that Putin's goal is to rebuild some sort of new body that resembles the lost Soviet Union. Whether that's going to be the Union state that includes Belarus, Russia, and perhaps some future Ukraine or not remains to be seen based on how well the Ukrainians can resist Russian aggression. But it seems pretty clear that Putin has a huge drive to rebuild what he sees as one of the, as I guess his fond memory of the Soviet Union. The idea that in terms of individual claims, I guess we'll start going through the history, but I mean, almost everything you said is either half wrong or just completely wrong. The idea that Europe was offering them an unfair deal, one of the biggest reasons why they required that EU deal was because Russia themselves began to put blockades on certain imports for Ukraine, just because they thought the president was looking towards the European Union for a deal. The idea that the Russian deal was better when the European deal would have just allowed them access to the markets, while the Russian deal was literally an exclusive deal that would have forbade them from trading into other markets is hilariously stupid. The idea that this conflict began in 2014 is also just completely wrong. There have been foreign policy experts, I can find papers back since 2010, claiming that Crimea was under threat of invasion from Russia, and it was invaded. Russia has been consistently working with disinformation campaigns among actual military aid to places like Donbass or Crimea, since at least 2010, if not earlier. There's been a long and a rich history of corruption in Ukraine, whether we're talking about people that used to actually be in the Soviet party that became leaders of Ukraine, or we're talking about people that more or less wanted to be Putin stooges later on, like like Yanukovych. I guess we'll get into the individual history of any of these particular things, but yeah, that's the idea right now today that Russia is somehow justified in their aggression and their taking over of any of the Ukrainian territory, whether that's when they took over Crimea in 2014, whether that's the eastern territories that they're trying to take over now, or the rest of Ukraine that they're trying to take over. I think it's just absolutely absurd. I would echo something that Haas said in the very beginning of the debate, that one country's security cannot be increased at the expense of another. That's a hilarious statement coming from somebody trying to defend the neo-imperialism of the wannabe Soviet Union. And I'm curious how you guys will defend this in the conversation coming forward.
Okay, so I guess the best thing to do would be start with, I guess I'll start in 2004, since I know more about like recent Ukrainian history. So the Orange Revolution, which I respect the Ukrainian people for taking power into their own hands to stop an election that was stolen, as was confirmed by the Ukrainian court system in 2004. And we call it a coup, or it was a coup of Viktor Yanukovych. What was failed to mention is that after the Ukrainian courts decided that there was large-scale fraud committed on behalf of Viktor Yanukovych in 2004, is that there was a revote. And after the revote was done, once international monitors were now involved in the situation, that's when Viktor Yanukovych lost the 2004 election. And so the Orange Revolution, that is usually cited here as a coup, what is not mentioned is, just like in the 2014 coup, there is an election after both of these instances. In 2004, there was a revote. And in 2014, after Viktor Yanukovych was impeached, he then fled the country, and there was another democratic election where somebody was democratically elected. There was also another election in 2019 where Zelensky won with about 73% of the vote. I respect the Ukrainian people in taking the power in their own hands to take back their democracy in both instances. I would also like to talk about, I know both of these people care about sovereignty a lot here. In both instances, both in 2004 and 2014 and before it, the Russian state has meddled in the affairs of Ukraine on multiple occasions, fomenting corruption, directly getting involved in elections, and directly getting involved with Ukrainian politicians and basically sponsoring them on behalf of the state. They have gotten involved in the affairs of Ukraine, and it's not that surprising that you're going to see protests against politicians like Viktor Yanukovych, and you're going to see the Orange Revolution in 2004 when a foreign state meddles in the internal affairs of another state. So it's strange for me to hear all this concern about America interfering in the internal affairs of the Ukrainian government in 2014, when there was so much of it going on ever since the creation of, ever since Ukraine voted with over 90% of the vote to separate from Russia in the early 1990s. I would also like to cite, since it hasn't been brought up by anyone, that Russia guaranteed in 1994 in the Budapest Memorandum to not invade Ukraine after it gave up its nuclear weapons and to respect the nation's territorial integrity. I would also say the spirit of that was also violated when they meddled in the internal affairs of Ukraine in both 2004, 2014, and many other instances. Besides that, I heard a lot about concern about the far right. But I heard no concern about, for example, the Russian National Unity Movement, which is a Russian neo-Nazi and militia group that is active under the arm of the Donetsk People's Republic. They are a neo-Nazi militia that has been fighting on behalf of the Donetsk People's Republic for a very long period of time now. And so for me, this claim of denazification, or this at all having to do with denazification, is ridiculous to me. Not only are Nazis fighting on behalf of Russian-backed rebels, but there's also instances of, for example, Belarus, the leader of Belarus, which is involved in the conflict, praising Adolf Hitler, saying Germany reached its peak under Adolf Hitler. And not only that, but also we can talk about the Chechen fighters, for example. In Chechnya, they have put homosexuals in concentration camps. Now, I don't want to talk about the deep history of the gays in Nazi Germany, but if there's anything that is Nazi-esque, I would say putting homosexuals in concentration camp would solidly fall under that category. This doesn't even have to do with polling data when we talk about anti-Semitism between the two countries, or the fact that the Azov Battalion's political party, which is something that's cited on multiple occasions, has not won a single seat in Ukraine's parliament. You can add the right sector as well. The right sector has not run a single seat in Ukraine's parliament either. Now, maybe if you add in the three-finger party, you can get one seat out of 450, but this idea of the Ukrainian Nazi state that's being taken on by the Russians is ridiculous when the Russian government and the republics that Vladimir Putin has recognized is fighting with neo-Nazis. It's simple that the Slavs of Europe obviously have a bad memory with neo-Nazis, and it's really easy to convince your population that the enemy is bad if you call them all Nazis. If in this debate I said, my two opponents here are neo-Nazis, it would justify me being extremely terrible towards both of them, because nobody likes Nazis as long as you're a normal person. We can probably get into specifics of U.S. involvement in 2014 and the labeling of as a coup. We can get more into the Budapest Memorandum. I'm hoping to get more into that, but I'll just end my statement there for now.
I would also like to add on amends to Dylan's statement that I would like to congratulate the neo-Nazi country of Ukraine for being the first country outside of Israel to have its two highest level political positions held by Jewish people, which is an amazing achievement for a supposedly
because the
neo-Nazi
Nazis
opening statements.
Oh
my goodness! Opening statement.
You couldn't.
Hold on one sec, gentlemen.
Gentlemen,
They do. There are still 5 minutes left for.
Thank you. Well, if we're gonna play, now we got factoids.
I do want to say, that it
yeah.
isn't that surprising that these people couldn't respect the rules of debate when the Russians are not respecting the rules of war in multiple cities across Ukraine. Sorry,
almost as though they were trying to improve the security of their opening statement by violating the security of ours. Unbelievable.
I hate it. All right. So I'm going to use the mute button liberally tonight, just because I really seriously want this to be a fruitful conversation. So
I agree.
Any last words from Destiny and Dylan in terms of that opening?
Last word, just for context, before we get into debating the ethics of the Azov Battalion, this is a fighting force of maybe 2,500 people, of whom 10 to 20% are supposedly neo-Nazis, out of a Ukrainian army that has over 200,000 active military personnel. The idea that Ukraine is some hotbed of neo-Nazi activity is just hilarious. Having both a prime minister and a president that are Jewish, like it's one of the biggest driving forces that Putin uses to try to push his population against Ukraine. It's absolutely pure propaganda. All right, I think are we good here, Dylan? I've got a few more minutes. Anything else you want to?
I mean, I could just list off like Russian war crimes in Ukraine, since they talked about that. The targeting of civilians in Kherson, the targeting of, I mean, he's laughing, demented as usual. Targeting of civilians all across Ukraine.
Since you addressed me, you're full of shit. They're not.
I can address all I want. My goodness. See,
he's laughing.
I can comment on that.
There are about 3 minutes and 15 seconds left for Destiny.
So tell him to stay on topic. Don't make comments directed at me, Pillsbury.
It's a debate. It's a debate. What do you mean? Don't make comments directed at you? Do you want to just make long speech followed up the long speech?
Do you think would it be considered a war crime when Yushchenko didn't that guy say that he was really crazy? He had like Agent Orange poisoning or whatever. That was kind of a random thing when he was running against Yushchenko. This is kind of strange. I'm sorry, when he's running against Yanukovych. That was kind of weird.
A little strange. I mean, but
you know, might have randomly,
look, hey, amongst
it's a little strange. All the journalists.
Wait, what the look at that? Look at that! Just can't stop. See, again, more evidence that pro-Russian individuals in this conflict just can't follow rules of engagement. Anyway, critical civilian infrastructure has been targeted in Mariupol. Civilians have been bombed in Kherson again and again and again. Kindergartens have been targeted. NGOs like Amnesty International brought off
right now, in violation of the Geneva Convention. I believe that the largest nuclear reactor in the world has been hit multiple times. It was currently on fire.
That's true. That's happening right now, actually. True.
We don't have reports yet. I think I saw an RT article saying Ukrainians themselves were shooting handguns at it in order to foment like false.
Did we check to see if there was a swastika on the side of the nuclear reactor? It could be a Nazi nuclear reactor.
There was a picture of a swastika that was released by Russian state media, but it later came out that it was part of Call of Duty War at War. So it was. That was the end of our opening statement. We rest our case.
All right, want to let you know, folks.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's a rough one.
Not even through the opening statements. Unreal.
It does definitely fit with my. I mean, I don't know a tremendous amount about either one of them, but it does definitely fit with my understanding of like the vibe that I get about both Jackson Hinkle and Infrared. That Hinkle is able to maintain fire discipline here, and Infrared is not whatsoever.
Yeah, zero restraint at all, and like, yeah, it's just kind of frustrating to just see them like throw out like. There's a lot of, I feel like with these kinds of debates, there's always like a lot of muddying the water by just like making these like historical claims. and like empirical claims about something that happened, and then you're just like, and then for like an uneducated audience, I guess, like that's kind of what they're counting on, like who don't know these like nuanced truths. Like, for example, they were talking about that coup, right? And it's like, and I actually noticed that came up in the Putin interviews with Oliver Stone, and he actually says he called it a coup. Also, Putin called it a coup, right? But like when you actually go and look, it was like a big protest movement. It was almost like an Arab Spring in Ukraine when they were like on the streets and demanded that the election was illegitimate. I think, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken.
Right. So I will say I did find this odd in Dylan's opening because right, so you're talking about 2004, which is what Dylan was talking about too, and it probably is worth making a distinction here because I mean Putin might have said this in the Oliver Stone interview, but I think that, to be fair, I think what Haas and Hinkle were talking about in their opening when they referred to a coup, I don't think they said anything about 2004. I think they were talking about 2014, right? Because I think.
Maybe. I mean, I thought it was about like, because the whole like Yanukovych and Yushchenko like dispute, right? Where one of them who's like pro. I thought that the whole history was like that. I think it was Yanukovych who's pro Putin, pro Russia, and they had made a tentative deal to like have like an association agreement with the EU, if I'm not mistaken, and then the pro Putin president like backed out of the deal. And was
I think that was 2014. Yeah.
Oh, was that 2014?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And was that, and then he got like removed because of mass protests, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or is that...
Yeah. So 2004, I think, is a much cleaner case, right? Because that's in that case, you know, the election. I mean, it was the Arab Spring style mass protest movement against a stolen election, and then there was like a redo of the election with better supervision, and that's like very clean and democratic and defensible. I think 2014 is a little bit more murky because in 2014, which is the one where you're talking about with the stuff about the EU, right? You have somebody who's a pro-Russian president who is very corrupt, bad guy in lots of ways, and possibly is using violence against protesters. Like security forces were opening fire. The only reason I say possibly is that on one thing I did last week, I was brought up that there's some dispute about this. My initial reaction was like, okay, right, sure there is, guys, sure there is, right? But then like I actually started. I asked Cuba Warinsky, who I do not believe is a Putin apologist, and he was like, I have no idea. I've read a bunch of conflicted accounts of this, so I don't know, right? But like, let's say for the sake of argument, right, has security forces like open fire on peaceful protesters, right? So there's some legitimate cause for overthrowing him beyond the corruption and everything else. And in many ways, it does. Certainly, 2014 still does play out much more like a popular uprising than a classical like military coup. I think that's true. I think where it gets a little bit more complicated is the fact that it's not like, I don't think anybody even claims that guy came into power through a stolen election. I mean, I think that he was legitimately elected, was driven out in this uprising. It's, I think, maybe a little bit unclear how much of the country supports it. Zelensky does later win a real election. That's true. But also by the time that happened, some of the pro-Russian parts of the country left by then, right? Or been annexed. So given all of that, I mean, I think that part's like a much bigger, weirder mess than you get out of either their opening statements. Would be my only comment on that issue. Also, though, like, okay, assume for the sake of argument the most pro-Russian construal of events from 2014 to 2022. I don't know what, like, there's a lot of work to be done even after you accept that construal, which I think is probably going to be inaccurate in a lot of ways. But even after you accept that story, in toto, there's still going to be a lot of work to be done to say, therefore, it was totally fine to invade the whole country.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I also thought it was like, It feels a little bit disingenuous when people say like, oh, well, there's a lot of Nazis in Ukraine, so, therefore the invasion was kind of justified. Like as if like either of these people would ever accept the United States invading another country because it has a lot of Nazis in it, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
it's, yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, and in fact, I mean, look, as I heard somebody point out earlier today, right? A lot of Putin's denazification rhetoric is, I mean, a lot of that is about a play for domestic support, because obviously the deep cultural memories of World War II, but like also there is probably an extent to which that's him like poking at the United States because he's like making fun of the debathification. So it's like, see, we're doing denazification. It's all it's all the same. But yeah, you're right. There's no way that either of these guys would accept that as a justification for U.S. invasion of anywhere, nor should they. And it's
Well, it's important to point out too that it's not an invasion; it's a special military operation.
Yeah.
So I like that. The denazification is a special military operation, right? Not an invasion.
Yeah. Well, that's another funny thing about I think Hinkle made the point where he was like, well, Russia had offered deals. They'd offered peace deals to Ukraine, and Ukraine didn't take them. And it's like, well, yeah, but like the deals in question had like incredibly amorphous conditions, like denazification being one of them. Like it's unclear what that even means. So like the idea that like, oh, they were just putting out these incredibly reasonable demands that weren't met. I mean, it's a little strange.
Yeah. And again, I think like your point just now, okay, I would be super curious where Hinkle and Haas come down on a bunch of U.S. interventions over the years. I mean, if I had to guess, I could be wrong about this, but my strong intuition would be that probably both of those guys were like very against the bombing of Serbia in 1999. And it's like, well, that happened after a U.S. Basically, the United States was cracking down because Milosevic wouldn't sign the peace deal that they wanted. So, is that okay? And by the way, I mean, if you're going to talk about far right militias, this certainly Serbia, is I think it's a little bit messy because there's this weird dynamic, which I think you just kind of saw in the openings we just watched, where if you're an actual, if you're one of the three people who are actually Putin apologists, then you'll play up the Nazi thing beyond anything that's remotely defensible. But then if you're fighting with those guys, the move is always to like really, really minimize Ukraine's problem with like far right militias. It's like, no, I mean, there is a real issue here. Like, this is not nothing. This is not like Putinist propaganda. Like you actually, I mean, yeah, Cuba Warinsky put it really well. There's an interview I would call a while back. It's like, look, sure, there are Nazis in lots of countries. Lots of countries in some sense have Nazi problems, but in most cases, you wouldn't get a Nazi militia that was just integrated into the armed forces, right? The 82nd Airborne will be the Nazi Airborne, battalion. And I think that it is probably true that just saying that they don't have any electoral support, which is true, probably should not be taken as like dispositive of the whole thing, right? That it's like, yeah, right, they could basically get nobody to vote for them, but that's not, it's not really the case that the only way that far right militias could be dangerous is that is that they'll exercise peaceful political power through people voting for them. So I think that there is probably more of an issue that I think Destiny and Dylan are letting on here, or like acknowledging. But at the same time, again, I mean, this goes to Victor's point that, all right, hey, far right militias. Okay, so the interventions in Bosnia and Serbia, like you'd definitely be okay with those, right? I mean, like you don't like that's a much bigger far right militia problem, than Ukraine has. I don't, I mean, you have I mean, in lots of ways, I mean, like this is the kind of shit that like people who are like neocon warmongers would say. But even though their conclusion was horrible, they weren't entirely wrong. I mean, the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, in lots of ways, was modeled on a classic, fascist party. So was the invasion of Iraq okay? I mean, what are the? It's also just kind of like a weird insult to everybody's intelligence to think that this really has much of anything to do with Russian war goals. Like, it's like really that's it. This is why. That like the Russian government is just so morally offended by by the presence of Nazis and the Ukrainian military.
Yeah, like as if Putin would like throw his economy into complete devastation and like waste thousands of troops and hundreds of military vehicles in order to stamp out Nazism in another country. I mean, it's just it's absurd.
Yeah, Achille Albertine, thank you for the super chat. Says, maybe I missed it, but it's strange that the yes side is opening without explicitly referencing Putin's speech explaining it. Well, I think you can go further than that. It's not just they didn't reference the speech. There's no, like, I mean, I think those were both pretty strange opening statements.
Yeah, they didn't make it, like, I mean, maybe I missed it, but did they make a direct, like claim, like specific claim that, oh, it's justified because of X, X, and X? They were just kind of muddying the waters with all these like different claims about how Russia has been victimized or something, and or that Ukraine's been violent or something like that. But no direct.
Yeah, it really seemed like that there was no like. I mean, again, even the no side's opening was a little strange in this way, but the yes side's opening was very strange this way. Like normally, what you do with an opening statement is you're trying to do the like big like bird's eye view, like big picture. Here's my big argument that I'm going to be promoting throughout this debate, and I was so little of that. Haas and Hinkle just went straight into like all of these like really detailed claims, about specifics. It's like but like what's your big picture here, guys? What's the like, give me the 2-sentence version of why the invasion is justified, and like it just sort of seemed like they were making like random pro-Russia claims and throwing them against the wall. And the Destiny and Dylan one was a little bit better, but I mean, to be fair, I guess maybe they think some of this stuff just goes without saying, but like I would have thought, like if you're going to do an opening statement there, it would have been a little bit more like, look, here are the circumstances under which it's justified for one country to go to war with another. Clearly, this doesn't meet those, conditions. Like something more like that than just kind of doing what they did. And then obviously they were just fucking with him at the end with the time.
Yeah, totally. I think that what the Haas and the other guy, I think Hinkle or whatever his name is.
Fun
that
fact,
like
the name of the Hitler character in the Great Dictator.
Oh, is it? That's funny. This tendency to just get stuck, like to get like fixated on these like little minutia details of like historical facts, that feels like such a propaganda tactic. Like I feel like that's what propagandists do. They're like, they're telling you this story, but like you didn't know about this detail and like this detail and like this little thing, and then you're kind of just like left like, oh well, okay, like maybe and that is what I think pulls maybe people who are like vulnerable to this in, is like, oh, I didn't know about that. Like maybe that's true, right? Like maybe, so I don't know. That's just like the feel I got from it.
Yeah. It is weird that nobody's given any criteria for when a war is justified yet. It's like, well, how are we going to know if the question's resolved if we don't know that we're operating in the same, like,
Yeah, right. And yeah, I would have just thought some general principles would have made sense here. Instead, like, yeah, Haas and Hinkle just sort of started out as if they were already like 2/3 of the way through the debate, and they were just like, "Oh, here's some stuff we forgot to say earlier," and then Dylan and Destiny were just kind of. I don't know. I mean, you got the sense that we're not taking this super duper seriously, but let's see how it keeps going.
Do you notice how Haas and Hinkle were just like laughing that whole time too? It was like really, it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough.
As mentioned, if it's your first time, Modern Day Debate is a neutral channel. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We have many more debates coming up. And I want to let you know our guests are linked in the description if you'd like to hear more. Last but not least, gentlemen, really, during this open conversation, I really do need you to work with me. It really does have to be that you're not speaking over each other, because that, of course, thwarts our own purpose of having the debate if people can't hear people because they're speaking over each other. So we're going to go into open conversation. The floor is all yours.
Well, where do we want to start, gentlemen?
I'll start, since you guys just went by responding to, well, I mean, there's a whole lot to pick through there, but Dylan did make the inflammatory claim that that Yanukovych was impeached. And despite the fact that Dylan claims to be an expert on the matter, yada, 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 foreign policy expert, he seems to have lost out the fact that Yanukovych was actually not impeached per the constitutional requirements in Ukraine. In fact,
I would like to finish.
Well, let me finish, because you happen to not know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
So there needed to be 3/4 of the parliament to guarantee an impeachment, and they did not reach that. They did not get those 3/4 votes in order to impeach Yanukovych. And the Supreme Courts and the constitutional courts were not involved. They did not recognize this as an impeachment. I believe it was the following day or maybe 2 days after Yanukovych decided that his life was under threat and he was going to flee to the second largest city in Ukraine. He did. He fled by helicopter. And there was actually reports. The reason why he fled by helicopter is because there was reports that there was going to be a act of violence upon him committed by these far right-wing forces that were trying to lead this coup. And in fact, upon his the series of cars that were supposed to be carrying him off to Kharkov when he was leaving, when in fact he was in a helicopter, they were fired upon by snipers. So he was not impeached. There was no constitutional requirement. They didn't get enough votes. So I don't know why you said that.
Well, number one, it is a debate that is ongoing in Ukraine, whether he was legally or not legally impeached. This has been okay. You can continue to. Okay, you continue to laugh.
So why'd you say that he was?
You didn't let me finish. Okay, it's an ongoing constitutional debate on whether he was legally or non-legally impeached.
Why is there a debate?
Hold on, let's
Yeah,
just
what's
give
the
a minute
debate
or
about?
two.
James,
Just a minute or two for Dylan to respond.
Okay, it is a ongoing legal debate within Ukraine, and I am going to appeal to the legal scholars in Ukraine, which said that he was constitutionally impeached. I'm going to appeal to them because I'm not a legal expert, and I know Jackson Hinkle, you're not a legal expert as well. But I do want to bring up here for a second that this is probably the first time I've ever seen Jackson in favor of a regime change war. And can we also talk about, let me
appeal to the scientists.
We'll give you 30 seconds. I got to give you 30 seconds, and then we got to kick it over.
Haz, if you want to talk about science for a second, can we talk about the claim you made that the Ukrainian government was working with the American government to make bioweapons that would target Russian DNA?
There have been reports that the biolabs that are operating within Ukraine, that the Ukrainian government is allegedly solely operating, were indeed this is an allegation by the Russian embassy, and I'm going to appeal to.
Do you have any evidence?
I'm going to appeal to the experts at the Russian embassy who are experts I'm going to appeal to the scholars on military threats, the military apparatus of the Russian foreign ministry. I'm going to appeal to the scholars of the Russian military, who I trust them. I'm not an expert in the intel that all they have and all.
Which scientist has backed that up? Any scientist?
Those are Russian military foreign relations experts, and they know what's going on. They have the intel. It's the GRU. I don't know
which ones. Which
legal scholars in particular?
So my question.
Which legal scholars are arguing that the impeachment was legal then?
So you're fine with me appeal. So it's a problem for me to appeal to legal scholars, but it's not. It's a problem for you to do
I'm
that.
just applying the same standard you're applying to me.
But you were laughing when I was doing that, as if it was a ridiculous thing to do. But you're doing the same. So it's okay.
I'm applying the same standard.
So then
All
we
I
can
can say is that
Mhm.
I don't believe that the Russian foreign ministry would be lying about this.
So you do believe? Okay, how would that be done exactly? How would you target Russian DNA with biochemical weapons? How would that work? Definitely considering.
Wait, you don't know that there's
wait,
wait,
let me
wait,
finish.
wait, you don't
Wait,
know
let
that
me-
there's
let me
biological
finish. Let me
weapons that
finish.
target-
One
Let
sec.
me
Hold on,
finish.
you don't
To be
know
fair,
that there's
let me finish.
biological
Hold on one
weapons
sec.
that
To be fair,
target
to
specific
hold
DNA.
on, gentlemen.
Let me
To
Wait,
be
do you
fair-
not
hold
know
on,
that's
Okay.
gentlemen.
Look at him.
You don't know
Shut
that's
up
a
for a
thing.
Let me
second. You
finish.
guys, seriously, just to be fair to Infrared, you did ask him a question. I want to give him a chance to answer that last question, Dylan. I promise I'll kick it right back to you.
Okay.
Yeah, finally, you don't know that that's a thing, that there's biological weapons that are being developed that target the specific DNA of specific peoples, that the US was accusing China of developing this and vice versa for China. You don't know about that whole thing?
My problem is it's very difficult for Putin on one hand to talk about the united the history of both Ukraine and Russia, and to have the amount of relations between Ukraine and what?
Yeah, we know they share DNA.
Ukraine. Yes. So how are you going to make biochemical weapons that target Russians? But there's no evidence for this.
Well, can we just ask a more reasonable question? Wait, don't you think it's why would we trust the Russian state media who is trying to
it's not the state media,
fabricate?
It's the Russian embassy.
Let's
which
give
is
Steven 30
30
seconds, and we'll kick it over to you, Fred or Jackson.
So, if I were to try to tell you that I know that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction because the U.S. State Department...
This was not the pretext for Russia.
Oh my God! Wait, is there an echo in my? Was that my voice echoing?
Because it's pivoting. This was not the pretext for its special operation, so it's not a relevant debate.
We have to.
It's off
I
topic.
promise.
Destiny, you started this debate bitching about not being off topic, and this is
we
off.
have to. So I hate to do this. Just let's
Right.
give it another 30 seconds to Destiny. We'll come right back to you, Infrared.
Okay, I don't understand, because I don't think the Kremlin Gremlin would be happy if I were to cite the U.S. State Department when the United States is trying to enact a unilateral war against another country. I don't think I'd be able to say, well, the United States has this thing. You would need some sort of external European Union body or UN body or somebody looking into something. So for Russia, that's trying to justify a unilateral invasion of a country, to say that well, their embassy said that this was a bioweapon, I don't think that's that's fair.
I feel bad for you, Jackson.
Yeah. If this
Infrared, you got to do me a favor. You can't, if you're gonna unmute yourself. Come on, you got to work with me here.
Oh, but so I'm gonna take his insults and not respond.
Right,
We're not gonna
here,
play
now's
those
your
games.
chance
You can
to respond.
insult me, but just do it in your time.
He's gonna sit his
Infrared,
little
you
bitch
can-
ass gnome ass down and fucking put some respect on this, or I am gonna fucking cut him off. Now, if this was the pretext for Russia's special military operation, you would be right. We would need that evidence to be provided. But that's not the fucking pretext for the special military operation. It's another type of allegation, the details of which have not been disclosed to the fucking public. So arguing about it is fucking pointless. You want to know my fucking opinion? I trust that they wouldn't make this up because they don't need to, because they have plenty enough, such as the fact that the Ukrainian government is infiltrated by anti-Russian neo-Nazi forces. And we're going to talk about that, actually. You said that because Zelensky is Jewish and that there's Jewish representation in the Ukrainian government, that there couldn't possibly be neo-Nazi sympathies rampant in the Ukrainian ruling elite.
I never said that there weren't neo-Nazi sympathizers. There might be sympathizers, but that's not what your initial allegation was.
Was Nazism solely defined by anti-Semitism? No, it was anti-Semitism actually was just a subset of the pan-European supremacism that defined Nazism. They were anti-Semitic because they considered Jews to be foreign to Europe, right? The main thrust actually was targeted toward Russians who were considered Asiatic and Slavs to the east in general.
Wait, who?
They wanted to enslave and exterminate the Russians too and the Slavs too.
Who the fuck asked? Nobody cares. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
No, it does. Because the fact that
let
Zelensky is
finish.
Jewish doesn't fucking mean that the Ukrainian government can't have neo-Nazi sympathies. Stepan Bandera, who is a Nazi collaborator during World War II, is widely celebrated in Ukraine by the Ukrainian government. They're putting monuments by him. They're putting his pictures up during Maidan. He's been exonerated and he's been rehabilitated, despite the fact that he was a fucking Nazi collaborator. Now, if you can't square that consistency with the fact that Zelensky is Jewish, you should go ask Zelensky himself why he's the head of a state that is celebrating a Nazi collaborator despite him being of the Jewish background.
So are you saying that the Russian Nazis like Jews? They're fine with Jews? I mean, the Ukrainian Nazis, they're fine with Jews? They're like pro-Jew Nazis?
That's a question you should raise to them. And
I'm asking you. I'm raising the question to you.
They may harbor anti-Semitic views, but as far as I'm not concerned, there is nothing impossible about the idea of Western Ukrainian who are from Jewish descent to also have neo-Nazi sympathies themselves.
Having sympathies for somebody that might have been a
Nazism is
national hero.
primarily
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you.
Infrared,
My bad.
we've
Not
given you a good
only
amount of time.
anti-Semitism.
Let's kick it over to Steven, and then Jackson, just
So-
after Steven, just in case
Mhm.
Jackson has anything too.
So this is like Nazi Nazi propaganda. It's hard to tell the difference. This is like Putin propaganda 101. Okay, so the original claim was that the government was full of like neo-Nazis, and now it's shifted.
It is.
Infra.
Am I done talking? Holy shit. Now the claim is moved all the way back to, well, there is a hero that was pretty inarguably a neo-Nazi that some people in Ukraine celebrate.
Not
This is
some,
a totally
not some.
totally-
The whole Ukrainian government.
Totally,
has it.
no, it's not.
The
He's an
whole
incredibly,
Ukrainian government.
he is an incredibly divisive figure, and there is an incredibly divisive figure, even in Western Ukraine. Okay, the
Divisive
United States.
because of-
Can I finish a fucking sentence? Holy shit! This isn't your Spencer debate where you're going to ramble for 12 fucking hours without letting me get a fucking word in. Okay.
I mean,
The idea that just because somebody worships some hero or some country said, oh, this guy was really important in our history, means that the entire country is all of a sudden infested with neo-Nazis is no less true than when the United States celebrates any fucking hero that has a sordid history or has been racist or has been anti-Semitic or whatever else. The fucking United States took in Nazis after World War II in exchange for some of the scientific information they could give us. It doesn't make us Nazis. It doesn't make our government full of neo-Nazi sympathizers. If you want to make the argument that Ukraine has neo-Nazi sympathizers, then you need to show me neo-Nazi actions happening today in Ukraine, not trying to allude to some hero that a prime minister, in 2010 or whatever, decided to nominate as some fucking hero because of his history in Ukraine. You need to show me something current about that. What are the neo-Nazi activities that Ukraine is taking on today? Don't tell me who was nominated as a fucking national hero.
You're completely full of fucking shit. You just said that Stepan
And
Bandera
there's
was
no
only
answer.
incidentally
There's
a,
no
a
answer.
Nazi collaborator. His whole historical significance was that he was a fucking Nazi collaborator. He has no significance outside of
I think
So no,
I can
it's not
I
like
think
some
I can add
US
some
figure.
context to
It's
this
not like
too.
the inventor of the fucking telephone who
Jackson.
happened to be a racist. This guy, his primary historical significance was being a Nazi collaborator who betrayed the Soviet Union and was attacking them on behalf of
That's
the fucking
true.
Nazi. To
That's
exterminate the Slavic and Russian and Ukrainian peoples, to create a westernized Ukrainian collaborator state. So you're completely
Just to
full
hear-
of fucking shit when it comes to that.
think
Finally, you want to
Jackson's
know
ready.
about the neo-Nazi activities that are going on now and have been going on in the past 8 years? Sure, it's the Azov Battalion, which is the vanguard of Ukraine's military in the eastern Ukraine and in the Donbass, which is regularly attacking civilians, regularly shelling civilian infrastructure, regularly embarking on a campaign to slaughter and exterminate the Russian peoples in eastern Ukraine. They committed the massacre of Odessa back in the early days of the Maidan. All sorts of fucking neo-Nazi activities. They burned people alive. They've hung people. They've slaughtered people. They've made people disappear. If you want to talk about neo-Nazi activities in fucking Ukraine that are now in contemporary here, we have a whole host of fucking...
Every single
we
thing
have
you
a
just
list
described,
of-
modern day
Add
Russia
some
has done.
context. I want to jump in and add some context.
They crucified people.
Go ahead,
They
Jackson.
crucified
the
None
people.
of that was
Aha,
neo-Nazi
David.
and all
Yeah,
that's
it's not
contemporary.
neo-Nazi to
listen,
crucify people for
listen.
being
No,
Russian.
it's not a neo-Nazi war crime.
Listen, listen. You guys have all
You
been
don't need to be a
talking.
Nazi to commit war
You
crimes.
guys have all been talking. Let me get in my 2 cents now, okay? So, at the end of the day, the primary goal of the ideological inheritors of the Organization for Ukrainian Nationalists, which is the vanguard of fascism in Ukraine. This is the ideology, the radical faction within this organization, especially of Stefan Bandera. They are the people who are primarily responsible for the hundreds of thousands of Jewish, Polish, and Russian deaths that took place during World War II when Western Ukrainian ultranationalists and neo-Nazis were collaborating with the actual Nazis from Germany that were invading. Okay, so ideological inheritors of this ideology, and apologies for not being able to pronounce these names properly, but Oleg Tianyabuk, who is the co-founder of Oleg Svoboda. He claims that he wants to purge Ukraine of Jewish people and Russians. He was ranked the 5th most anti-Semitic political leader on the planet in 2012. It just so happens he was a people's deputy in Ukraine up until 2002. But this guy right here, who was a co-founder of Svoboda, also co-founded this ultranationalist right-wing party with Andrei Parubi. He was the leader of the Euromaidan protests. He was the one that helped organize the violence that was inflicted upon the what's assumed to be roughly 50 individuals who died in the massacres on February 20th of 2014 at Euromaidan. He was the speaker of one of the most recent parliaments, the chairs of one of the most recent parliaments in Ukraine. He was the leader of the Society to Erect the Stefan Bandera Monument in Ukraine, and he claims that Bandera was the most important person in Ukrainian history. So it's not just, and I could go down a list here. You could Maxim Marchenko. This individual, Zelensky, replaced the civilian governor of Odessa, commander of the far-right Adair battalion. You have Viktor Yushchenko, who is president. He actually publicly, before leaving office, signed a decree stating that for an unbreakable spirit of heroism, self-sacrifice, and the struggle of the independence of Ukraine, I'm granting a status of hero of Ukraine to Stefan Bandera. You can look at tons of people. Andriy Belitsky, Ukrainian white nationalist. He was the co-founder of the Social National Assembly, first commander of the Azov Battalion. He's celebrated on TV shows. He was a big part of the Maidan protests. You can go down the line. Many members of or deputies of the
30 more seconds.
People's Deputies of Ukraine, National Security and Defense Council, secretaries, all of these people within the Ukrainian military and government have had some sort of an ideological either sympathy to or participation in, a lot of these people have, with neo-Nazism. Okay, and this is the last thing I'll say regarding neo-Nazism. This is a shocking video. There's a video of some of the neo-Nazis who helped organize and carry out the Maidan coup, who said, if not for the 8% of neo-Nazis, the effectiveness of Maidan would have dropped by 90%. And these were the same people that were funded by, indirectly funded by U.S. agencies on the ground, like the National Endowment for Democracy. Last thing I'll say is
that was the last one that
Dylan or Destiny.
Yeah, real quick. So just as a quick
if the Azov are marginal, if the Azov battalion is marginal, then why did Poroshenko in 2014 say they are our best fighters? Why did even the mainstream Western press report that as far as Ukraine's eastern operations were concerned, the Azov battalion was of vital significance? Why did the National Guard of Ukraine...
That was the last question.
We can't answer 400 questions.
They made a post on...
So just as a real quick thing, okay? Like, you can go back as much as you want, like 20 years ago when Ukraine was barely a country for 10 years and the country was still mired in corruption, and try to say, well, these guys came from these parties that were like, blah, blah, blah. Like, show me anti-Semitism in Ukraine, right? Ukraine is like one of the last parliament. Can I hold on? Well, hold on. Hey, come on.
There are a lot of points.
Yeah, so where is the anti-Semitism in Ukraine? Where is the Nazism in Ukraine? You can't point to the civil war happening in the East and going, civilians are dying. That's Nazism.
Nazism isn't
you can't point towards people being killed extrajudiciously, people that are being invaded and genocided, people that are being deported from their lands. Because if you want to call that Nazism, then we just have to go over to the East and look at Putin. He's the biggest fucking Nazi alive right now. So the idea that in and of itself qualifies as anti-Semitism, when Ukraine is probably the least anti-Semitic country in Europe, according to the Ukrainian Jewish Center, or according to the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, at least, when you look at the fact that people in Poland are so eager and keen to take on people that are fleeing from Ukraine, like we don't see this mass persecution of Jewish people in Ukraine. We don't see any like rampant anti-Semitism in Ukraine. You can go back all you want and point to like one hero that was nominated by an outgoing prime minister, or you can, point to these people that in the very beginning came from far-right parties. But there's just no evidence today that there is this rampant anti-Semitism, this rampant Nazism in Ukraine. It doesn't exist.
Where are you getting this idea that the only measurement of Nazism is anti-Semitism?
Okay.
Nazism was also
Thank you very much. So there's also something that's really interesting here, and it's that Nazism seems to matter so much on one side. Nobody cares about the neo-Nazi militias fighting on side by side with Russian soldiers. Nobody even brings them up. The Russian National Unity Movement and the militias fighting on behalf of the Donetsk People's Republics. That isn't brought up. Why? Because those are inconvenient Nazis. Those are Nazis on the Russian side. People don't talk about the fact that we're talking about the Nazis are bad. Why are the Nazis bad? Obviously, because they put people in concentration camps, and they slaughtered people and all the war crimes that he brings up. But the fact that the same people involved in putting homosexuals in concentration camps are right now within Ukraine fighting against the Ukrainian government, that isn't something of concern. I heard them laugh when I talked about Belarus, the Belarusian dictator, Lukashenko, praising Adolf Hitler. These things are inconvenient facts because the problem is right? And this is the fact of the matter. There are Nazis fucking everywhere across this conflict. But the problem is the people want to hype up the Nazis on one side to make them the Nazis because Slavic people have a terrible history with Nazis. If you can make your opponent the Nazis, then boom, they're the bad guys. Anything you do against them is justified. If I could stand here and tell you that Russia is a Nazi state, I could bring up the fact that 5% of Ukrainians believe that Jews should not be allowed to be citizens, while 15% of Russians believe that thing, almost triple that statistic. I could bring up the Lukashenko quotes about Hitler. I could bring up the gays being put in concentration camps in Russian territory. I could bring up the neo-Nazis militias and say, so Russia is a Nazi state, but that would be dishonest. But I'm seeing that dishonesty from both of you right now trying to paint Ukraine a Nazi state, and I don't even think Jackson and Infrared got their points in order. Jackson saying that they are anti-Semitic Nazis, Infrared saying that these are Nazis who love the Jews. I can't even.
I didn't fucking say that. What I actually said was that the emphasis on anti-Semitism may not be as strong as the emphasis on pan-European supremacism and racial exterminationism, but that's the fucking point. And moreover, the movement for national unity is not at all fucking relevant or prevalent within the fucking Donbass. They're fighting.
Hold on.
Yeah, they're nowhere near as relevant or proportional to the fucking forces of the Russians that are fighting in the Donbass as is the Azov battalion. They're marginal. They're completely marginal.
But
they're Islamophobic. The Chechens are fighting. The Chechens are right now a very important part of Russia's operation right now. You think the Chechens are working alongside these totally Islamophobic prevalent forces? No, they're not prevalent. They're fucking completely marginal.
And
these
if you take into account the premise of what started this entire conflict back in 2014, the Euromaidan protests and the violence that ensued there, and the fact that it was co-opted by these coup leaders that were Western backed, you do have to acknowledge that the effort to accomplish this and the success of the movement was led in great part thanks to Andrei Parubi, who is the speaker of one of the most recent parliaments and the chair of one of the most recent parliaments in Ukraine. This is the guy who literally sparked the entire conflict. Another thing I heard you say that was even maybe more damning than the fact that you falsely claimed that the president was impeached when he wasn't impeached was when you said that you claimed that, or maybe it was Destiny actually. I might be getting my quotes wrong. One of you said that Crimea was illegally invaded by.
All right. I think we might have finally moved on from the Nazi thing.
I mean, I hope so. It's like it's just such a strange argument to be like, how many Nazis are there in Ukraine? Are there Nazis? It's like, as Ben, you were saying earlier, like, we haven't really gotten to any sort of argument about like justifying an invasion or whatever at all yet, right? It's just petty fog
I guess
everywhere.
The principle is you just count how many Nazis are in each of the two countries in the war, and whichever one has less Nazis is they're the good guys, and you should root for them.
That seems to be the implication, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just, and the example that they're going with is just bizarre because, like, I feel like, even if we were to grant that, there is this, like, widely celebrated Nazi sympathizer in Ukraine, and that's really problematic that they are, like, have a culture that's just okay with, celebrating this Nazi. Like, by itself, I mean, obviously it's a problem, but, like, by itself, the fact that Ukrainian people are overly charitable to a former Nazi figure in Ukrainian history, that by itself seems pretty causally impotent in terms of anything meaningful, right? Like, I would hope you can point to some sort of like actual policies that are being passed that are Nazi-esque in order to even begin to attempt to make a case from Ukraine's Nazi problem to a justified invasion.
Yeah, I mean, the Bandera thing is weird because, like, sure, I could think that's very problematic, but also, again, I don't know what the principle is here. Like, as we were having this conversation, I mean, I'm sitting here in the state of Georgia, which not so long ago had hundreds of Confederate monuments, all around the state. I think most of them are gone now. but I think if somebody like, if I think that if I don't know if a foreign power had launched an invasion of the United States in early 2020, and I wouldn't really accept look at how many Robert E. Lee statues they have as a casus belli. That doesn't seem relevant to anything particularly. It's that's fucked up. I mean, Ukrainians should campaign to to get the to get all the Bandera stuff taken down. But I don't know. I don't know what it has to do with the original subject. I mean, this is one of the reasons that I always think and there's been a lot of stuff in this debate so far that's had a very hastily reading from Wikipedia vibe to me. But this is one reason I hate arguing about facts and debates, because it's the least interesting thing you could do. It's the hardest for anybody who's watching to know how to adjudicate it. It's why I really wish somebody would step aside at some point here and be okay, let's assume
I was just gonna say, I mean, I was hoping maybe maybe Destiny would do that, if anyone was gonna do it, or maybe Dylan. But it seems like the vibe I'm getting from at least Destiny in this is that he's just enjoys triggering infrared as much as he can. He's just he just wants to see it. I feel, as you said earlier, it seems like he's not really taking it seriously and is just kind of there to be a bit of a shit disturber or something.
Yeah.
I mean, he did call the Kremlin Gremlin earlier, but
I agree with I like the analogy to the Confederate statues and the Confederate flags and stuff. And I think what that also indicates is there's a huge gap between saying people in the US are too permissive of Robert E. Lee statues versus there's a slavery problem in the US, which I think is and that's the kind of leap that Infrared and Hinkle were trying to make, is there's a Nazi problem. Because they, celebrate this Nazi historical figure, when obviously that's a very big leap.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that says something bad about right-wing Ukrainian nationalism, that that they're willing to celebrate a Nazi collaborator, and fair enough, right? I mean, similarly, you could say that says something really bad about American, whatever, about Georgia Republicans 2 years ago, right? That they're willing to celebrate people who who fought in defense of slavery, and that this says that there's something damning about these ideologies there. But also clearly, slavery was not a live issue in Georgia in 2020 when most of the statues were still up, and the Nazi thing. It's you could say this speaks against the ideology that's comfortable with this association without actually saying Nazism isn't any danger of being imposed in Ukraine. And again, is that the idea, right? Is that if it was, that's why it would be justified? It's a humanitarian intervention to save the Ukrainians from Nazism.
Still terrible, justification. I mean, I was just thinking about a comparable case. There's a bunch of countries that might stone people to death and do all kinds of horrible things, and that's not a justification to invade them, right? They still have the sovereignty, and no one would be arguing. I think there'd be a lot of anti-war people if someone tried to invade any of those countries, right? It just has nothing to do with the question. I mean, whether or not a country is barbaric or in some other way internally,
I mean, for sure, putting up a statue of a former Nazi sympathizer is nowhere near, for example, the level of badness of, say, China's imprisonment of its Uyghur population. But I don't think either of these guys would support going to war with China over those humanitarian concerns.
Sure, nor should they. But absolutely. No, that's exactly right. And again, I'm not even I'm willing to be a little bit of a centrist on the Nazi issue, which is a great sentence to say. Sure. I mean, far right militias are bad. I have some sympathy for Ilhan Omar pointing out that if we're going to send a bunch more weaponry to Ukraine, there should be there should at the very least be a safeguard about whose hands they're going into to make sure, people like the Azov Battalion are not getting it. That all sounds totally reasonable to me. But again, like, I don't think their serious claim can be there are these creepy far-right militias in Ukraine, and therefore we have to go, like, again, have a humanitarian intervention to save the Ukrainians from them, right? Like, so if that's not the claim, then why are we talking about Nazis at all, right? I mean, like, at least in the context of talking, like, there are lots of things you could debate with regard to Ukraine where the Nazi question might be relevant. Again, like, what should the U.S. policy be on sending arms and funds to Ukraine, right? Like, then they'll sure bring up the Nazis there. That would make sense. But if the question they're supposed to be debating is Russia's invasion of Ukraine justified? And so if so, yeah, as I really wish like Destiny or Dylan had like taken a step back here and been like, okay, guys, let's say for the sake of argument that there are.
That's true, yeah.
Everything you just said is true. There are 10 times as many Nazis in Ukraine as in Russia. Explain to me why that would make the invasion okay.
Yeah, it almost feels like Dylan and Destiny like almost like took the bait and just got bogged down in these, in these historical little details, and because I feel like it would have been interesting to see the reaction if they'd been like, oh, but we're debating about justification here. Like, I don't know what they would have said in response. They would have tried to make some humanitarian argument, I guess, but it would have been weird.
Yeah, right. I also kind of wish that one of them was one of them on the no side was a socialist, because you've got Dylan, who, as far as I can tell, is like sort of on the line between being like a decent social democrat and like something a little bit squishier and more Elizabeth Warren-ish. I think that's probably a fair characterization of where he's at. I mean, whatever. To be clear, by far the person in this screen I like the most, right? But like
you've had him on a couple of times, haven't you?
Yeah, I've had him on. Yeah, he's been on.
Would have been cool to have him on to analyze his own debate, or would that would have been kind of awkward, because you'd be like telling him where you think he went wrong. I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, he was on he was on the for the Hitchens the death penalty debate. But yeah, again, by far, yeah, I mean, he was on a show a few days ago. Like, by far the person up there I like the most, and then Destiny's, I think ambiguous in certain respects, but definitely to the right of that, right? I think we could say that fairly.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I mean, he like on his best days, he talks like an extremely moderate social democrat. On his worst days, he talks like a, I don't know, a Hillary man or something, or a like a, the sort of the kind of Democrat that I would like the least, right? So
yeah.
But if one of them had been a socialist, I think I would have really liked also earlier when there was all the weird shit about the biolabs and the, you should trust the Russian embassy, and be like, why do you guys trust anything the Russian state says? Not just like in a sort of third person objective, why should anybody trust anything the Russian state says? But like specifically, why do you guys trust anything the Russian state says?
It was amazing to hear Infrared like just blatantly admit that he's choosing to trust what like the Russian government is saying in this case. Like, that was so weird. I was like, you're actually just saying it too. It's just a weird thing to admit,
And his argument too, he said something along the lines of like, well, they don't need to lie because they have enough. And it's like, well, what does enough mean, right? Like, enough to convince the international community that the war is justified? Obviously not, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's not like with Iraq, there weren't like 20 different things that were thrown against the wall to try and justify that. Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, it's like his argument was bizarre, but also it's like, okay, look, you guys are supposed to be leftists, so I could understand maybe. I think it would still be like dumb, right? But I mean, it would be like, I think it would be epistemically unjustified but it would be like a little bit more politically consistent and understandable if this were like the 1980s and you were arguing about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and you were saying like what the Soviet embassy says, I just believe them because it's like, okay, that's some sort of, not the kind I'd want, but I mean that's something you could describe as a socialist state, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's like I would sort of get why a leftist would have that instinct, but it's like, why do you guys as leftists like just have this automatic deference to
Are they leftists?
I mean,
what is their stated political ideological commitment? I'm not even sure.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong about that. I just assumed that there were some kind of weird tanky leftist.
Yeah, maybe
They-
tankies.
They both, I think they both call themselves Marxist-Leninists.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so like as Marxist Leninists, why is it that you guys are this deferential to a government that's like wrapping itself in the Russian Orthodox Church and pan-Slavic nationalism to justify this? That Putin, in his speech before the invasion, blamed Lenin and the Bolsheviks for like letting Ukraine become independent in the first place and breaking up the Russian Empire. Like, this could not be less ideologically aligned with what with where you guys say you're at. Like why is it that this is the government out of all the governments in the world that you pick to just uncritically trust the crazy ass claims they make about DNA bioweapons or whatever, that are specifically going to go after the Russian DNA but not the Ukrainian DNA? Like, like why? Maybe there's like something got lost in translation there. I have to say, on the face of it, that does not sound plausible. But like, why is it that this is the government that you've chosen to distrust?
It is very strange that like a lot of Twitter Marxist-Leninists do still seem to have a lot of support for Russia. Like it's almost like they don't take Russia at its own word about like what kind of political commitments it has. Like actually recently it was really funny. I don't know if you guys saw, but that Caleb Maupin guy.
Yeah.
His Twitter account got tagged by Twitter as Russian sponsored media, which is hilarious.
He was very upset about it.
It still is. I just checked right now, and it still right now says Russian state affiliated media.
Was he the person?
Which is amazing.
There was someone working for IT who was angry that they got branded Russian state media, and fair enough if you want to get angry about that. But their criticism of the label was like, I'm an individual journalist. It's like, well, yeah, an individual journalist who's funded by the Russian state, right? Like that's not really like a response.
I mean, look, I don't have, I was on RT once. Naomi Caravani interviewed me on Redacted tonight about my Hitchens book. So there is one video of me floated around that has the Russian state affiliated media disclaimer on it.
Now all the Russia defense makes sense.
Yeah. So I don't have, I mean, look, if RT still existed, they wanted me to go on tomorrow, I would go on tomorrow. I would, like, if somebody were saying what Haas is saying on there, I would argue with them, right? But I don't have I'm not particularly inclined to moralize the platform, right? I mean, like, it was just, my friend Zisham Alim has like a works as like a commentator, like on the website, for MSNBC. I think, and like whatever, I'm glad he does because he puts out content that's like way to the left of like almost anything else you see on MSNBC. But whatever, it's NBC ultimately is it's like a shitty corporate network that like does tons of war propaganda all the time and is owned by General Electric and whatever, right? Like, so I don't think there's anything about RT that's intrinsically that's intrinsically worse than that. I mean, I don't think it's I have no problem with anybody who worked for RT, or nor would I for anybody in Russia. Like, I'm sure that Putin wouldn't allow anything like this at this point, but like, if there's like America TV, there was like AT in Moscow, right? You know, that I wouldn't have any problem with any Russian leftist who went on 18 to say what they had to say, if that was a way to get it out. But Caleb Maupin is like literally my history with that dude is that I had pretty much didn't know who he was. Like I had like I'd vaguely heard the name before, and I had a friend who'd like I think sent me a couple things about like how he was crazy, but this is like a friend who like I think tends to be a little uncharitable to a lot of people. So it's like, yeah, whatever. I'll take it with a grain of salt. And then there was one day when Jacobin tweeted out like Jacobin reprinted Eugene V. Debs's anti-war speech. This is like last year. They reprinted the speech, and the Jacobin Twitter account tweets it out, and Caleb responds and says, how can you print this when you have pro-war Anna Kasparian, I'm working for you on your YouTube channel. And I said, this was the whole thing. Can you tell me which wars Anna supported? That was it. And that guy was like bizarrely obsessed with denouncing me for like months because I said, can you tell me which wars Anna supports? Like that is
deranged. Like
that was a seriously deranged.
There's no other word to describe it. Like
my one interaction with Caleb Maupin was I think this was forever ago. I guess I moderated a debate between Caleb Maupin and Vaush because they needed a moderator, and I guess Vaush asked me to do it. And I did it, and I didn't say anything because they were both so aggressive and I had no experience moderating that I just got trampled, and I said absolutely nothing. Every time I tried to interject, they would just keep going. And so I was completely impotent as a moderator. But still after that, Caleb Maupin goes on Twitter and he accuses me of getting paid by Vaush to rig the debate in Vaush's favor.
Oh man, that's funny.
Oh yeah.
I noticed someone in the chat. I wasn't looking at it that much, but said, why am I laughing about Caleb Maupin getting labeled? Like I'm laughing about censorship. And I don't know, that's interesting. Like in what way is someone on Twitter being labeled something? I guess it's not really a form of censorship because he's still on Twitter, and he even has a pinned tweet that he's arguing against the label. So I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I guess you could say it's like the Tipper Gore stuff, like labeling records.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so, I mean, it seems like being opposed to there's a certain sort of like honorably free speechish, tint to opposing the Tipper Gore stuff. And I think you could probably say you're right. I mean, I get what you're saying. It's not censorship because it's not taking it down, but I guess even having like, here are the opinions that you need warning labels for,
it's delegitimizing speech, I guess, would be the most generous way of taking up the point of the person in the chat. It's fair enough. I just found it funny because I do find him to be such a deranged person. And I'm a human being, and someone who I think is like very uncharitable and very deranged is getting something like, not nice is happening to them. I'm a human being. I thought it was funny.
Sure. We have I mean, generally speaking, I don't like the idea that a neutral social media platform is setting itself up as an arbiter of truth, or is doing these like extremely selective things about like, who they feel the need to warn you about, right? There's no like nobody, there's no like American state affiliated media, British state affiliated media. These countries all sponsor media companies. So I don't like the labeling, but I would be okay with just like if Twitter's policy was just like once a week, they'll just switch the label and just like make a crazy false label about Caleb Maupin, Chinese state affiliated media, just so he can get mad about it all the time.
I feel like it would be okay for them to do that, but if they were transparent about the reasons for why, right? Like if they showed like documentation, IP addresses, and they're like, you know, we can see that he actually is state affiliated or something. There's like actually like evidence for it. That would be better, right? Transparency, I think, would be better.
Yeah, I think if
behind
you would
those
argue
things.
for it at the basis of transparency, it has to be a. I think you have to. I think there has to be some sort of much more transparent set of principles behind it, right? Like that they. So it's like, what is it that makes this one case special, right? Like why? I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you had like anybody who works for for NBC, if they had if there was like an in the pay of General Electric, label under it, like would I be against that? And maybe not. I mean, if it were consistent enough, right? You just got to see whoever these sponsors were.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I don't think Haas has that label on his Twitter. He doesn't. I just checked. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
If you are a highly placed executive at Twitter and you're watching this, I assume a couple of you are.
Yeah, it's time to put that label on Haas too.
Put the or just like don't even make the claim about the Russian state. Just put some sort of demeaning label on it.
Well, I love the idea that like the Russian state, like of all the people they could pay to disseminate propaganda, like they'd select Haas.
Or even Caleb Moffat, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that is not a well-oiled propaganda machine. Like that's who you pick. It's like all right. Who are Americans going to listen to? Awesome. All right.
By Russia, I'd just be curious, like, hear your thoughts on that more, and whether or not you respect the will of the Crimean people who voted in a referendum overwhelmingly to legally join the Russian Federation. 96.77% voted in favor of joining the Russian Federation.
Was that after the invasion?
2.51% supported staying in Ukraine.
Jackson, was that after Russia invaded Crimea? They held that referendum, right? I just want to get that.
What do you find?
We can talk about the specifics.
Well, I just want to hear yes or no. Is that Jackson? Was that the Russian referendum they held after they invaded Ukraine?
What do you find? Listen, what do you find as a Russian invasion? Because going back to 1804. There has been Russian troops in Crimea.
The invasion of when they took over, when they invaded Crimea.
Continuously invading Ukraine, despite the fact that they have had troops there since 1804, then sure, we'll call it an invasion, but we both know it's not an invasion.
The Crimeans declared their independence
overwhelmingly
before the Russian invasion, just like the people in the Donbass did. Just like having troops
stationed in a port is not the same as taking over the entire peninsula.
Separated from the Ukrainian government.
What's your evidence they took over the entire peninsula? Because there are plenty of videos on the ground of people saying they are not threatening anybody. They're here peacefully.
Who has sovereignty right now over the Crimean Peninsula? I'm sorry. Who administers right now to the region of the Crimean Peninsula? Is it the Ukrainian government? Yeah, or is it the Russian government?
It's a part of the Russian Federation since they voted.
Okay, so what does it mean to they voted that? Who held that referendum?
The referendum was organized by the people of Crimea.
Under who? It was a Russian organized referendum. It was organized by the
What actually happened? Pardon my interruption. Just to be sure that Jackson, did you feel like you had enough time to answer that last question from Steven?
Sure.
Got you. Okay. And then I think, Stephen, you were asking.
So a referendum that's not recognized by any other country in the world, including Ukraine, obviously.
Why don't
the idea that you could invade the idea that you could invade some part of a country and then hold a referendum there to see if those people want to stay with you or not? Even if we granted all of that they did say yes, you can't just have populations referendum away parts of your country's sovereign territory to other invading nation states. That's just not how that works. Even if that was the case, I don't care what's interesting you. Even if that was the case, that doesn't work that way in any other part of the world.
Yeah, that's not what happened.
Respecting the results.
Listen, Destiny. One of the ways.
No, wait, dude. Hold on, James. Seriously, they can't just throw out like 50 million. I didn't talk at all. I didn't even answer your question. I didn't even get to answer his question.
Let me respond to what you said.
Not to mention the fact that,
gentlemen,
you stop
talking. I hate to do this, but I do want to say, Dylan, is there anything you want to clean up on behalf of Destiny, because we haven't heard?
Yeah, there's two things. The first thing I wanted to bring up is that I didn't hear from Infrared really. He just said the Chechens are fighting the yes, but Chechens involved in putting homosexuals in concentration camp.
That doesn't
currently
make them
active.
Nazis.
Wait,
That does
wait,
not
wait,
make
no,
them
no.
Nazis.
Listen to me. Whether
Even
or
if
not,
those
wait,
allegations.
let me fit. Whether they're Nazis or not specifically doesn't matter.
Okay, then just say that.
Let me finish.
Then
Jesus.
just say that.
I don't care. Shut up. I don't care. Okay? I'm trying to finish my point. I think that people who put people in concentration camps, minority groups, should not be involved in any active combat zone anywhere. In fact, they should not even be allowed to hold governmental positions.
So,
and I'm not finished, and so you should stop talking. And so with that in mind, and knowing when you guys talking about all these war crimes and everything that was so terrible, I think it's weird that we can just look past the fact that one of the people involved currently in fighting the Ukrainians are the same people who shoved people in concentration camps in Chechnya. Also, it's weird that you are fine downplaying your guys' Nazis. You admit, I guess they are Nazis fighting on behalf of your guys' side. You'll downplay your own Nazis and upplay the other side's Nazis because your Nazis, again, are inconvenient. It's inconvenient that there's Nazis on your side. And so instead of being like, there's no Nazis on our side, where these Nazis are fighting a campaign of denazification.
Also,
Dylan,
too,
Go
I never even got to finish my earlier response to Jackson's neo-Nazi shit.
I was almost done. Also,
It's my fucking turn.
One
It's my
last thing.
fucking
It's
turn.
one last thing.
It's my fault. Dylan's talked too much. It's my fault.
Okay, wait 1 second. All right, I do want to give Infrared a brief chance, and then Destiny, I know you have a couple of points you want to make. So, Infrared, I want to give you a chance.
Yeah, let's go.
Maybe
so the first
2
thing
minutes
is
at the
very
most.
clear. Dylan, I know that you're in favor of a Nazi, pan-European supremacist, but LGBT-friendly ideology. I already know that, okay? But the fact is, I agree. It's probably true that there's a homo.
I just wanted to interject to say that if we're talking about Nazis who are not anti-Semitic and are also LGBT friendly, they are not making Nazis like they used to.
Oh man,
that's just never been my understanding of Nazism. But in any case, I just want to throw that in there. We can keep going.
Fair.
Homophobia in Chechnya. They're very much more in favor of more traditional values. That's their business. As far as concentration camps are concerned, I've seen no fucking evidence for that, throwing them in concentration camps. But even if I were to grant you that that was true, that still doesn't make them fucking Nazis who want to exterminate whole peoples because of their fucking nationality or their race or their ethnic origins. You seem to think that's not as bad or that's some kind of equivalent, right? But I don't think that's a fucking equivalent. I don't think having a conservative country, which I don't agree with persecuting sexual minorities, I just don't think that's on the same fucking level as being a goddamn fucking Nazi. You seem to not fucking care about that distinction. Now you're saying that I'm downplaying the Nazis on the Russian side because they're not convenient. Never mind the fucking fact that in terms of the objective significance they have compared to the fucking Azov battalion on the Ukrainian side, they are nowhere near as fucking relevant. They're not significant. They are marginal. They are marginal.
Yeah, okay, I thought it was. Hold on, Infrared.
Object.
Infrared, 1 second.
Objective.
Infrared, hold on. I just need you to. I thought it. I did sense something too. It did seem like your volume.
He
did
jacked
go
his shit
like
up.
20,
Oh, yeah.
20 seconds ago, it did seem like something.
Yeah,
changed.
because you're making everybody louder than me.
No. I promise I'm not.
Was that Russian
I don't even know
propaganda?
how to do that.
I mean, these
because
Nazis.
people in my chat
These
are
are.
telling you that. People in my own chat are telling you
Infrared,
that.
I can give you 20 seconds on terms
Yeah,
of wrapping up your
20
point,
more?
but then I've got to kick
Yeah.
over to Steven.
Dylan is making the claim that that it's just inconvenient for me, rather than the actual reality being the fact that the Russian nationalists and the Russian neo-Nazis are completely marginal in the Donbass, whereas the Azov battalion are not. He mentioned something also about Lukashenko's comments that were taken out of context. Lukashenko is an anti-fascist, 100% anti-Nazi, 100% anti-Hitler. We can actually get into the nitty-gritty of what proves and backs that up too. You took some statements he made out of context.
Steven's been waiting for a while to respond. I want to.
Yeah, so just to reiterate again, the Azov battalion is not making up the brunt of the fighting forces in Eastern Ukraine.
In Eastern Ukraine, they were.
This is a small battalion of like less than 3,000 fighters. The idea that these people are making up the majority of Ukraine's forces is just not true. And even of the Azov battalion, only a minority of these people are neo-Nazis. Even of the Azov battalion, a minority of people are Nazis. There are problems there for sure, but this claim that there is a broader Nazi problem in Ukraine, I mean, at this point, maybe there is, if we're defining Nazis as people that are pro-LGBT and pro-Semitism. I don't know what kind of Nazis these are, or what makes them Nazis, aside from earlier you said they kill people, which I
European
guess everybody on the
supremacist
planet
racist.
is everybody's Nazi. I don't, like, Hitler wasn't going for like pro-European supremacy.
Yes, he was.
Okay.
I would like
Did you really just say he wasn't going for European supremacy? In his last fucking speech, he talked about how Europe will be triumphant against the hordes coming from Central Asia.
Europe who? Europe who? Every member of Europe, every state that he invaded.
Yes, he was a European supremacist. He was a Western European supremacist. He considered Western Europeans.
I'm just curious.
And everyone else to be subhuman.
Would you characterize the Nazism of Germany as having a large anti-Semitic component and having a large ethnic component, where that ethnicity is not defined as European?
Aryan is literally Western European for the Nazis. That's literally what it is.
Okay.
I would like
Okay, because you're a little bitch and you never fucking defend what you just said because you're fucking wrong.
Let's have Jackson. Go ahead.
I would like to just say one thing really quick and then a broader point. So Destiny seems to be just hyper focusing on the Azov battalion, which yes is making up the brunt of the violent aggression against the people of Donetsk and Luhansk. Which, keep in mind, that war 81%.
Thank you, Strom, for the super chat.
So I guess we're not off the Nazis. Guess we're still there.
Seems like we're still doing the Nazis.
Seems like I feel like I was detecting a bit of like almost like a threshold Nazi argument about like when is one actually a Nazi, when is one not. It's like there's a threshold. You can be really reactionary. It can be your business in your country to be really. But then when you get to authentic Nazism, well, then that's I guess by implication justification for invasion. It seems to be the argument that Infrared's making anyway.
I guess. I mean, again, I would really like a sentence that starts with the invasion of Ukraine is justified because.
yeah, that would be nice.
Just give me a piece of statement here.
yeah.
I would also like I would like for Infrared, since he's the one who made the distinction, I would like for Infrared to provide like some sort of a super supposedly morally relevant symmetry breaker between like sending people to camps for their religion and like sending people to camps for their sexuality. Because that was a very weird claim as well. Where he's like, well, they're not Nazis. They're only throwing gay people in camps. Like,
yeah. There was some weird like cultural relativism in there for a second, but then, if there were Nazis, that would be different. Right, like you could just be like a right-wing Muslim fundamentalist and want to turn gay people, and I don't care for that myself, but I suppose that's their country; they could do it, But like, put an armband on that, and like an invasion would be justified.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm very. This has nothing to do with the content of any of this, but I just keep trying to remember the time in my life when I was angriest. And I'm trying to think, okay, what was I angriest? What was I angry about at whatever moment of my life when I was feeling the most anger? And whatever it was, didn't approach.
It's insane. I love how he turned up his own mic too. Like he wanted it's so weird. Like Infrared. Yeah, I feel like the first time I saw him randomly come up in like my algorithm, and like I saw a little bit of it, and I was like, man, this guy is like unhinged. And I did wonder, you were saying like I think about the times when I was angriest, and like I there's a part of me that just like wants to psychoanalyze, and it's like, what happened to you? Like what, like what was your childhood like? Like, are you okay? It's just like, it's very over the top.
Yeah. I also liked Haz's implication that James is like behind the keyboard, like lowering his volume just to mess with him.
He's like, everyone else is louder than me.
Well, you're a bitch and you never back up your points. Awesome. All right. Let's get going.
Of these civilian deaths that have taken place there in the past 3 years took place on the side of Donetsk and Luhansk. But as I mentioned, the people who literally led this coup are the ultra-nationalist right-wingers, many of whom, but not all, are anti-Semites and encompass this neo-Nazi, ideology. You seem to be leaving that out, and I can guess the motive why.
Why do you keep
to get to the broader point here, Destiny? A few minutes ago, you said that it's not okay for, and I'm paraphrasing, so if you want to rephrase this after the fact, go for it. It's not okay for troops to come into what you recognize as a sovereign country, and forcibly bring about a change of power. I think that's we can both agree, right? So why is it that you think that it's okay, I guess, for these far-right paramilitary groups that encompass this neo-Nazi ideology to hijack the Maidan protests, massacre people on February 20th when the protests were actually dying down and people were going home, and cause all of this violence to spiral out of control? And then when negotiations are going on between some of these neo-Nazis and the Yanukovych government to try and bring about pre-term elections to restore some order to the Ukrainian government with Yanukovych, the neo-Nazi factions, again, like Andrei Parubi, who was the leader, the commandant of the Euromaidan protests, he ordered upon his paramilitary individuals to continue blockading, to continue, holding their ground, so to speak, and holding their ground throughout the entirety of this protest meant raining down hellfire upon both protesters and police to incite more violence. And there's been countless Maidan leaders and activists who provided testimony that they were the snipers. It was not members of the Ukrainian police who were doing this.
Or Destiny.
Wait, so do you not believe that Yanukovych ordered his special military people to fire on protesters? You think that's just completely and totally bullshit?
Oh, 100%. There's no evidence, and in fact, the
Ukraine's Ministry of Internal Affairs literally says as much. Why do you say there's no evidence of that?
Because the Ukrainian investigation into this, the special investigation into this, actually did not make any initial charges against people who were involved in this. And again, in the
they didn't make charges because Yanukovych wasn't even given guarantees that he wouldn't be charged. That's why he fled to Russia. Unlike the prior prime minister that was able to have a transfer of power because he was guaranteed he wouldn't be charged, Yanukovych wasn't given any such guarantee. That's why he left the country.
My point here as to why I'm right.
Not really. Also, earlier you said you keep citing the fact that you keep citing the fact that in the East. Wait, hold on, wait, I barely talked. This guy's like rambled so much. I haven't responded to half what this shit guy said.
There's no evidence for this, so I'm going to answer the question.
Come right back to you, Stephen.
So you said, why do I think that there's no evidence for this or whatever? So the Ukrainian investigation, they didn't find any. And in fact, again, there's been several Maidan leaders and activists who provided testimonies, while 14 self-admitted members of the Maidan sniper units admitted in media interviews to the Maidan massacre, to sniping police and protesters. Several former members of the Georgian military testified that they and other groups of Maidan snipers in Hotel Ukraina, where these bullets were coming from. And the investigation actually proved that bullets were coming from here. They just never actually went to the extent of saying who was in the hotel.
Wait, do you want to kick it over to Stephen? I did, just because I did give you a chance to answer the question. So jump back to Stephen.
Oh, there's a lot of evidence. So if Stephen wants the full answer, he should be willing to get the full answer.
There's like 20 different things I haven't responded to. So whose findings? I'm not changing. You're the one that's adding a new goalpost at the end of every single sentence you've said.
You literally said
so I can't even respond. I can't even respond. Okay, hold on. Wait, okay. Are we doing this right now? Is this what we need to do to get the conversation going? Okay. So who do you side with? Who's ruling? What organization, what government's ruling do you side with that said that police did not fire upon protesters during the Euromaidan?
What side do I side with?
No, whose investigation are you citing? Whose details? Whose findings? Not a one-off media interview that was posted on Russia Today.
I'm referring to the testimonies given by the snipers themselves.
Testimony to who? Why would you only agree? Why would you only look at some testimony? Why wouldn't you look at the overall ruling of the Ukrainian Interior Ministry?
Because the Ukrainian investigation did not place fault on either side. Though according to the testimonies themselves, they admitted fault for doing this.
It's not that they didn't place fault on that. They explicitly said that Yanukovych ordered his police to fire upon the protesters. Do you deny that they said that?
They did not place blame on them. No.
Why do you keep saying place blame? Who's saying place blame? They made the statement. Their findings said
who did they charge? Because
I don't know if it was their. I don't think it was their role to charge anybody. And Yanukovych already fled the country.
It was their role to place charges. They didn't place charges because they couldn't find evidence that the police did this. In fact, the reason why Destiny, why can't you give me an answer for this? There were testimonies that the Maidan, the Maidan organizers were the snipers who shot at police and protesters. We have forensic examinations as well by government ballistic experts, which determined that about a dozen cases that the protesters were shot from Maidan-controlled structures, including the hotel. A forensic ballistic examination found that the bullets killed protesters did not match bullet samples from the police. I mean, I could go on and on. Why are you making assumptions without looking at the evidence itself?
Because I feel like I would rather rely on the overall rulings or findings of the entire committee rather than just trying to go off of some of the testimony that you might have found given by some of the officers that may or may not have been involved.
Well, I could go on more, but you have to understand that this committee at the end of the day is being controlled by the coup government who actually carried out this operation.
But earlier you had no problems going by information that comes from the Russian State Department about stuff going on in Ukraine?
I'm not talking about that right now. I'm talking about this. Why I'm actually looking at this investigation fairly and honestly, and you made the accusation that it was police from the Ukrainian, security services that fired down. Now you're getting caught in a little problem here. So you're trying to deflect back to earlier discussions. Why did you make that claim without evidence?
Why did Yanukovych flee the country? Was it when he wasn't given a guarantee that he'd be prosecuted? If
it was a coup government that was going to fucking trump shit up.
It was a coup government that was led by the guy that he was going to make his prime minister anyway.
Destiny, I just want to say one last thing on this point because clearly you're refusing to acknowledge the reality of the situation. Most people consider what took place on February 20th when 49 individuals were killed as the most controversial hours in any European conflict since the end of the Cold War. It was the precipice for this coup. It was what launched all of this conflict into action, so to speak. So the fact that it was a false flag attack led by the coup protesters themselves, the militia organizers themselves, to try and get Western backing and to try and incite more chaos in the streets when the protests were dying down is a very, very important note when you look at the broader context of all of this and the fact that after the coup that took place because of this, that is what sparks the increased aggression in the Donbass. And that is what also sparks the increased aggression against protesters in Odessa who are fighting back against the coup government.
You have no evidence to support any of that there was Western backing to any of these people, that any of this was a false flag. Everything you're going off of is complete conjecture. The testimony of one or two, I've got testimony in the United States of Bigfoot and UFOs abducting people. The testimonies of one or two people doesn't prove any of the claims that you're making.
Let's just actually go to U.S. involvement in this because I have a lot of quotes from actual diplomats themselves who admitted that they were involved in providing funding, direct funding to the Maidan coup organizers. So first of all, we have Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Piot, who were two U.S. diplomats, U.S.-Ukrainian diplomats at the time, who have a viral leaked phone conversation admitting to the fact that they were handpicking the coup government. They said
that conversation, where?
You want me to send you the link to it?
No, because I've already read the entire conversation. They don't admit that ever.
Conversation say?
They never said anything about handpicking the new government. It wouldn't even make sense. Really? Yes, really. Give me the quote where they say that. Give me the quote where they say that. Yeah, read it.
Okay. We have a leaked phone call here. They said, fuck the EU, referencing to the fact that the EU was not being aggressive enough during this whole situation. And then we said, or we have Victoria Nuland here say, Yats, referring to Yatsenyuk, is the guy who's got the economic experience, she said, referring to opposition leader Arseny Yatsenyuk, who backed the devastating neoliberal policies that were demanded by the West. So they were discussing whether or not Yatsenyuk was going to be an effective leader in the new government. And they were saying, well, maybe this person should be directly outside of the new government with Yatsenyuk. And Destiny, guess who ended up becoming the
Hold on, real quick, because you keep pivoting, asking questions, adding commentary. None of this shows them picking a leader. As you said, Yatsenyuk was already the opposition leader. Where is this idea that they picked him?
Who became the prime minister?
What do you mean? Yatsenyuk?
Yeah. Look at
who was already the opposition. He was already the opposition leader. He already had 370 plus votes in the parliament. What do you mean?
Andrei Puriby was the Maidan coup leader. He was the real opposition.
No, wait. Where is the evidence that he was handpicked? How was he handpicked? Wait, what? Because he didn't have the backing in parliament for it.
The chair of parliament.
No.
Why could he have not become the leader?
No. You're pivoting. Where is the evidence that this guy was handpicked by the United States? That he was pushed by the United States? A conversation about this guy saying he would be good when he's already the opposition leader is not evidence of him being handpicked by the West.
Well, there was multiple people in that conversation that they were going back and forth.
Yeah, they're going back and forth discussing potential. Yeah, you have no evidence. This is everything you do.
Just Destiny or sorry.
How is that no evidence?
Wait.
If there's evidence in the phone call of two diplomats saying, "Man, this leader in this country would be so awesome," and yeah, that other one sucks. Do you think that's evidence of an assistant to?
It just so happens, Destiny, that she admitted that the U.S. Stoked this coup with $5 billion in previous years to lead these regime change operations.
Wait, where did she admit that? Read that quote. Read that quote where she admit that.
Okay, I will. Give me 1 second here.
Can we all sit in silence while he reads and wait for it? I want to hear that quote where she says, the United States sent $5 billion in aid to stoke this coup.
Let me pull it up.
And if he pulls it up, will you admit you're wrong?
Yeah, if he has that quote, I would be interested in hearing that. We don't have to be silent. I'm sorry, Dylan. Go ahead.
Give me 1 second. I will read
exactly where the $5 billion went. I would be interested in that too.
In the meantime, folks, our guests are linked in the description. If you haven't already clicked on there, you can hear more from them.
Also, I would just like to say that there is tons of evidence of the Chechen government putting gays in concentration camps from multiple news outlets.
Testimony. Well, that's not what we're debating today. The only thing,
but the thing is,
the only thing you have to acknowledge.
So I'm just acknowledging.
Yeah. Well, we can debate that another time. But for now, what we're saying is that is not the same as Nazism.
Okay, but is that of concern? Do you think?
If I was Chechen, I would be opposed to it, but I don't live in Chechnya. It's not my business.
So, do you think that fighters who put gay people in concentration camps should be active in combat in
Ukraine? You cannot make the racist claim that all Chechens.
No. I'm not saying all Chechens.
I wish Dylan would have grabbed that moment and just said, but that's irrelevant. I feel like it's just all these moments to pivot the conversation back to the justification question, just get left hanging there, Yeah.
I mean, I was hoping that they would have completely moved on from 2014 before we paused again. But
yeah,
that's not going to happen. So, I mean, I had to pause on that last thing because it sort of sounded like he was saying that earlier, but he's just explicitly saying now that if you're not a Chechen, you just shouldn't have an opinion about whether about Chechen gays being put in concentration camps.
Yeah, and I mean it's particularly bizarre how he keeps switching from this fierce cultural relativist to this war hawk imperialist, depending on which country we're talking about. If it's the gay people being put in concentration camps, it's look, I would oppose it if I were there, but ultimately it's their business. And then when it comes to Ukraine, it's well, if they're ideologically in support of this Nazi historical figure, obviously that justifies an invasion.
But the funny thing is they haven't even said that explicitly yet. It's all implicit, right? They haven't actually said this is the reason why it's, as you said earlier, Ben, there's been no thesis statement, right? No thesis statement has been made yet. No one said this is why it's justified.
No, not at all. Thank you, Left Rebound, for the super chat. If the Chechens had built a statue of somebody who put gay people back in concentration camps in the 1940s, then would it be of concern to the rest of the world? like it's so fucking weird, like that that again, I still don't know. How far are we in? We are an hour and 3 minutes into the debate. I still don't know why it is that Haas and Hinkle think that the invasion was justified. I've heard a lot of claims from them about like the sort of he said of like, Russia versus Ukraine, the West stuff. But like I've heard a lot of claims about, like Zelensky or the West says this, but actually this other thing is true. Like there have been a million of those. But like putting that together to be like, and here's the one that shows why it's okay to invade. Like it's like I just haven't heard anything like that yet. Because it's like, all right, fine, Jesus, let's assume. I mean, I think again, the least interesting thing you could do in a live debate is like try to adjudicate like specific empirical facts. Like sometimes it's unavoidable, but the more you can avoid it, the better. But like one thing you really are not going to be able to do is like decide exactly who started shooting and like something that happened 8 years ago in Ukraine like this. Like as like, well, I don't know. I looked at the ballistics reports and like I'm pretty sure, like,
yeah, it's ridiculous.
So it's like, okay, I just want like to step back, like, okay.
It's like argument by implication or something like that. It's like that's all they're doing. It's like argument by implication. It's like we're gonna point to all these like factual things, and then you should be able to tell by implication that that's the justification or something. It's weird.
Yeah, like let's say for the sake of argument that it was the anti-government snipers, were the ones that's like doing most of the shooting at this incident. It really was a false flag thing, like you said, right? Okay. My instinct is that's probably not true, but whatever. Like, let's say it is true. Okay, great. Spell out for me why that means that it's okay 8 years later to invade the country. Like that's
even grant that there's some U.S. involvement, interference, in influencing the population. We can grant all those things, right? And it's just still doesn't actually tell us anything conclusive, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like not only is it, the fact that they are, focusing on quibbling over the historical facts rather than, actually like addressing the core issue. I mean, not only is it unfortunate for like the audience, but I think it's also kind of a tactical error on Dylan and Destiny's part, right? Because it's like, if you asked me like, where are pro-Russian, like, basically propagandists, I feel comfortable using that label for these people in particular. Like if you were to ask me where would a pro-Russian propagandist be most comfortable, it's on quibbling about these niche historical facts, right?
Yep.
Whereas it seems like I would be much less confident in these same people's ability to grapple with like the core normative issues.
Yeah, no, exactly. And Silver, thank you for the super chat. Silver says this really reminds me of the way when the police kill a black kid, Fox digs up the time the kid jaywalks and trumpets it.
True.
I kind of see the analogy there. Also, somebody in the chat said, and this is something Hinkle has sort of seemed to be saying earlier, well, it doesn't really count as an invasion because there's already an ongoing conflict. And you want to be real careful about that one because I think you're going to find just historically that a lot of things you want to call invasions wouldn't be invasions by that standard, right? I mean, like, look, the United States had no fly zones in Iraq, and had like been regularly shooting down Iraqi planes, and there was there had been like several bombing campaigns, etc., before 2003. So, like, does the fact that the conflict had been going on since 1990 mean that 2003 wasn't an invasion?
Yeah, it's a weird argument to make. I mean, it would be like if the Cold War had actually resulted in actual invasion, it would still be an invasion, even though the Cold War was a conflict that had been going on for a long time. Like the invasion still stands if a country invades another country. Like,
yeah,
weird.
and I mean, What a pass that gives to imperialist world leaders, right? All they have to do to justify an invasion is start a conflict before it. Yeah.
Exactly. We're in conflict, so
Yeah.
that's just conflict.
I also like the argument that it's different because Ukraine is Russia's neighbors, so which is like, you know, this is like a good socialist case for the Monroe Doctrine here. But you know, if something's in your backyard, right? Obviously, then, you know,
Yeah.
like sky's the limit. Bay of Pigs, that was fine. You know, like the United States, you know, like gets into a big conflict with AMLO and invades Mexico. That's fine. You know, that's well, or it would be fine as long as the U.S. was already in Mexico fighting narco traffickers. You know, that like, you know, that it's not a real invasion. All right, let's go back.
Soldiers, but there are officials who were involved in that fighting in Ukraine right now.
Which ones?
You know, the one that you're like, Dylan, you liar, you've said this guy died.
He's alive.
That guy, right now, you're saying he's alive. That
He's
guy,
alive.
he specifically was okay.
Say
That guy, let's say he's alive. That makes the argument even worse. That guy was involved in putting homosexuals in concentration camps.
Okay, I haven't seen any evidence for that.
There's tons of evidence.
Want to give
To be disputed.
in case you have to quote Jackson, I don't want you to feel left out.
So Victoria Nuland, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, estimated in 2013 that the USA had, quote, invested more than $5 billion in 1991 to help Ukraine achieve the future it deserves. Or sorry, since 1991. Since 1991.
So since 1991, they've been investing money to have the coup in 2014. Do you not think that the Ukrainian citizens?
Wait.
The context of that year?
What was the quote again? Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, let's hear the quote again.
Since the USA had invested more than $5 billion since 1991 to help Ukraine achieve the future it deserves.
What does that mean? How does that mean that they're achieving a coup? That could mean, hey, we're giving them money to help Ukraine get better.
Considering Nuland had leaked audio recordings handpicked Yatsenyuk
they didn't handpick. We've already talked about how that's bullshit.
Also, we saw that
he didn't handpick.
The National Endowment for Democracy's president said this about U.S. support. He said just 2 months before the Maidan protest broke out, he wrote that, quote, the opportunities are considerable and there are important ways Washington could help. And this was in reference to the coup. This was the president of the National Endowment for Democracy.
There's nothing specific. It's all vague. It's nothing specific.
So here's the question. Where did the money
go?
Where did the $5 billion go? Yeah. So who received the money to start the coup? It's not the goalpost. This is where we're at. We're in the middle of the field. Like
the thing is, I know about this
shifting the fucking goalposts.
Putin said exactly. Putin said this specific thing, and the thing is, the $5 billion did not go anywhere near a coup aid or anything. The $5 billion.
Where did it go then, Dylan?
So I'm asking you. I'm asking you, Jackson. Jackson, you said the $5 billion. No, Jackson,
where do you think $5 billion?
You said it.
Where do you think
you said it,
Jackson? The U.S. State Department went.
Jackson, you said it. You said it.
I get it.
You can pretty easily logically infer that the fuck.
Okay, pardon my just to be sure that people can hear each of you make your point. So just going in order, we'll go alphabetically, which is DHJ. So okay, Dylan, and then Haas, and then Jackson.
So Jackson, you talked about the $5 billion. We're saying it did not go towards a coup. I don't see no evidence of this. This is something Putin repeated in his speech, which is a lie. So I'm asking you, since you referenced the $5 billion and you have yet to show any evidence that anybody was handpicked, where did it go? Where did this $5 billion go for this coup?
So Dylan, I know you're a fucking dumbass and you can't put two and two together here. There is logically nowhere else the $5 billion could have gone.
So you don't know. You don't.
It couldn't. Logically speaking, it couldn't have gone anywhere else.
$5 billion from 1990. Wait. Do you know the history of Ukrainian-American relations since 1994 to 2014?
Yeah, Dylan, shut the fuck up. Let me finish my point.
$5 billion couldn't have gone there and normal aid.
Unless
You don't
Jackson
think?
has something.
You don't think?
Jackson,
mute him so I can respond. Yeah, let him leave.
You might be on mute, Jackson. Let me unmute you. I think I put you on there earlier. Okay.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
the Financial Times, you're right, Dylan. Sure, I don't have the exact bank wire transfers and shit. You're right. I'm just completely making all this stuff up. Financial Times, though, reported that groups like New Citizen received this funding, and they reported that this money played a big role in getting the protests up and running, referring to the Maidan protests. This was led, of course, by Andrei Parubi, who's a notorious neo-Nazi within Ukraine that called upon the firing of protesters and police in the protests. There was one other point you made. It's slipping my mind right now, but yeah, I mean that sure, we don't have the exact bank wire transfers, but you can't entertain the fact that this all happened. $5 billion here. We have these phone recordings. We have all of this going on. We have, Chris Murphy, John McCain, Victoria Nuland, Jeffrey Piot going out on the streets of Maidan, passing out cookies to the protest.
He's doing the Gish Gallop.
Let me finish.
Oh my God, dude. It's just a million bullshit points. Like when one
15 more seconds, Jackson, and then we gotta
every
move.
time I get interrupted or you interrupt. So let me finish. You cannot entertain, or you have to entertain the fact, rather, that the fact that the funding began in 1991, 1 year directly after the effort upon NATO-aligned countries to bring Ukraine into NATO, that lines up perfectly with what the overarching mission at play here is of Victoria Nuland, to get the anti-NATO forces within Ukraine deposed from government, that's Yanukovych, and to get pro-NATO individuals in government to join NATO.
Gotta move it over. Okay.
So I gotta respond to that, because the thing is, it's also 1 year after the collapse of the Soviet Union and Ukraine went into economic ruin. And the $5 billion is something Putin stated as well. That's referencing to the entirety of US aid to Ukraine from that date to 2014. So you're telling me that the entirety of US aid to Ukraine was made up of just going to coup stuff when you have no evidence, no financial documents, no transactions, no direct evidence of any sort, then any of that went towards resources towards a coup. It is reference to aid.
He named it.
No, he didn't. He named nothing.
You left because you're a little bitch. You weren't here.
No, he didn't. So where did it go? Where did it go? And what did this group do that did the revolution? What did it do?
Helped organize the protest. It was a group that helped organize
the $5 billion went to what? What?
So I'm saying that Financial Times reported, again, you're right. I don't have the exact wire transfers. I'm not in these people's bank accounts. I'm just saying it's a little bit suspicious that we have Victoria Nuland saying that we have $5 billion going to Ukraine since 1991. Victoria Nuland's office happens to be the same office in which the National Endowment for Democracy is located. They share an office in Ukraine. We have Financial Times reporting that New Citizen received some of this money. Sure, definitely not all $5 billion of it. And it just so happens that these protests, which were Western-backed, and we know, according to this phone call, they were at least sympathetic to the, leader Yatsenyuk, who became the prime minister directly after the protests. This stuff all lines up. And it just so happens.
Hold on. I gotta respond. Okay, so we haven't established a single fact. We literally haven't established a single fact. We haven't established a single fact. So
we've established so many.
Okay, so all we've seen. I have the fact right. All we've seen is that since in 1992. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the United States and Ukraine signed a bilateral deal with the United States to send aid to Ukraine to help them for a variety of things. They identified 3 strategic objectives. It was to create a broad-based market economy, to help build a participation democratic political system, and to assist in social sector reforms to ease the difficulties of transition. That's where the money went towards. The governments themselves were the ones that were organizing and receiving the aid. The idea that you're trying to pretend that this $5 billion that's been allocated since 1992 somehow went through black market channels. If it did, then we wouldn't be talking about the $5 billion that the United States says that it sent. This would be black money or dark money that's going through other channels that you wouldn't have any idea about. Or rather, it would have been established by like a WikiLeaks leak or something like that. The idea that official U.S. aid that was agreed upon by the Ukrainian government, that it was going to end up in the Ukrainian government, and then somehow the leaders in the Ukrainian government decided to allow that aid that they as a government agreed to accept to be funneled to groups that would eventually form a coup, is ridiculous. A lot of this aid aid was far-reaching. It wouldn't surprise me if you could identify one or two groups that were involved in protests or coups that received this aid. Yanukovych probably had a lot of personal friends and probably people in the government that received that aid as well. The idea that that aid was used to back some sort of coup because you have a recording with two U.S. diplomats talking about a preference in leadership in a relatively volatile country, I don't understand why you think you can link these two things together. I can tell you right now that the United States sends so much aid all across the world. I could probably find aid going to every single fucking country that's ever had a revolution, that's ever had a coup, that's ever had any sort of political turmoil, and find two U.S. diplomats talking, expressing it. Can I finish one statement? I gotta finish. I
totally don't know how we could link.
I gotta finish a single. I have to finish a single statement.
Nothing else.
I have to finish a single statement.
So finally,
to be clear, so the evidence we have is that since 1992, the United States has sent $5 billion to the Ukrainian government, not to secret groups, not to protest groups, not to future coups, that the Ukrainian government itself okayed this bilateral agreement to humanitarian aid. And the only evidence that we have, and the only evidence that let me finish. The only evidence we have that this went to fund a coup is two U.S. diplomats talking on the phone, expressing a preference for some leadership or a failure of the EU to act on something.
Okay, let me go now. Okay, because this is actually really fucking simple. So first of all, there's like many prongs to the fucking stupidity you just laid on my fucking table. Now, the first thing is that you actually contradicted your little friend Dylan here, because Dylan, the fucking liar, just sat here and said that the $5 billion was an economic aid to Ukraine. No, it fucking wasn't. Because Nuland herself, who publicly denies funding the Maidan coup, in the same sentence she utters denying it, said that the $5 billion since 1991 was there to promote democracy. And you know what that fucking means? It means promoting NGOs, civil society groups, and forces within the Ukrainian government that are aligned with the US. Now, you're trying to make this allegation, it's absurd that they would fund the Ukrainian government that's later going to be overthrown. The thing is, the whole of the Ukrainian government wasn't overthrown. There are elements within the Ukrainian government that were against the president at that time. The coup was actually against the president, not the entire Ukrainian state itself. And even during the presidency of Yanukovych, before the 2014 Maidan, there was still a division of spheres of influence within the Ukrainian government between the Americans and the Europeans on one hand and the Russians. It was not a Russian puppet government by any stretch of the fucking imagination. It was still just as divided. And that $5 billion that was given to the Ukrainians since 1991 was going toward the forces that ultimately would culminate in the Maidan. Now, Jackson literally gave you a concrete fucking example.
I could give another too, Haas.
I want to respond.
Of a group that received funds from this $5 billion, that participated, that was pivotal for it helped organize protests for the fucking Maidan. So the whole point is that this $5 billion for regime change and democracy exporting that the U.S. was giving the Ukrainian government, which I reiterate, Dylan the fucking liar claimed was economic aid when it was not.
Oh, really?
It was political influence.
So can I get a commitment on it? Can you give me a commitment that none of this money went to economic aid?
No, you're shifting the goalpost.
Wait, no, I want to hear that. Oh,
you're shifting the fucking goalpost.
There it is.
Some of it may have had an economic component to it, but it was primarily to promote democracy. You made it seem like it was primarily about economic aid.
Number one, that's not even true. Okay, that's not even true.
It's not true.
So yeah, number one, 1.1 billion of it went to economic growth. 2.4 billion went to things like military assistance, border security, human trafficking issues, international narcotics abatement, law enforcement interdiction. That's actually the majority of it. The majority of that is not promoting democracy. It would actually be labeled under promoting peace and security when you talk about things like human trafficking, which is a legitimate.
Then tell Nuland that yourself.
Let me finish. I'm just telling you the exact money amounts, where it's going, and you're rejecting it. I'm telling you exact money. And the thing is about that, human trafficking, it's after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of issues when it comes to children being sold into sexual slavery. There was a lot of issues.
Which the CIA is involved with.
Okay.
Bro, he can't just keep screaming into his microphone, jacked up as loud as possible. Like you want to cry about?
I'm trying. Okay. So
Jesus.
Okay, so back to the issue. This is why a lot of this money went to Ukraine. It went to things to deal with things like human trafficking. It went there to deal with economic aid after the economic collapse post-Soviet Union. Some of it, of course, some of it went to 800 million of it went to governing justly and democratically, and 400 million went to investing in people. We can get into specifics if you want to break that down, but there is no evidence in the $5 billion of the $5 billion, any of this going into black sites or anything of this sort. The majority of this money didn't even have to do with democracy necessarily.
Got to go into Q&A shortly, but I know that Jackson, I think you wanted to say something.
So yeah, I would like to say something. So we also have the fact that at the start of the Maidan protests, the 3 new TV shows in Ukraine, that news TV shows that were covering the protests and working with opposition, were Hromadsky.tv, and there was 2 other ones. Let me see if I can find these here. But while I find these, I also want to note that these 3 TV stations received funding from the Dutch and U.S. embassies, as well as the Renaissance Foundation, which was funded by George Soros. The other 2 were Spilno.tv and Eknepeco TV. I don't know how to pronounce that. And George Soros, during the coup, the Maidan coup himself, admitted, quote, "I set up a foundation in Ukraine before Ukraine became independent of Russia, and the foundation has been functioning ever since, and it played an important part in the Maidan events right now." And then the third point, because again, you've alleged that I can't provide evidence for this, I've also provided the New Citizen organization, which was involved in the coup. We also have Yevhen Karas, who is the leader of Ukraine's neo-Nazi terror gang, C-14, which again helped lead the coup. He was the guy who said that if it were not for the 2% of neo-Nazis that were active within the Maidan protests, it would have been 90% less effective and successful. He said, quote, "We are now being given money, so much weapons, not because, as some say, the West is helping us, not because they want the best for us, but because we perform the tasks by the West, because we are the only ones who are ready to do, because we're the only ones who are ready to do them, because we have fun killing, and we have fun fighting." And they wow, let's see what's going to happen. That's what they said.
Okay, can I do a thing, because we're going into Q&A soon? Let's actually say, if Dylan will allow me, let's actually grant all of this. Let's say that there was a coup. Let's say that there was some revolution for some reason.
Fucking finally.
Yeah. I mean, I hope it goes in the direction that it feels like it's going in.
Yeah, I mean, because it's been like we're almost an hour and 20 minutes in. We're actually very close to, I think, the end of the part that we're watching, because we usually skip the Q&A. And I already feel like I have permanent brain damage from watching this much of this debate. But
and reading some of the chat too.
Yeah. But this has just been what I've been wanting for the last hour and 20 minutes. Just come on, man. Accept all of it. Accept all of it for the sake of argument, that that there are 100,000 times more Nazis in Ukraine than there are in Russia, that the shooting in 2014 was totally a false flag, that the United States has spent lots of the money spent by the United States was ended up going towards meddling in Ukrainian politics. That last one is probably true, whatever. They have fine, accept all of that. Why does that mean that the invasion is justified? I mean, if there's any time the United States can point to a country where Russia has spent a lot of money influencing that country's political process, it's okay to invade.
Yeah. Or what if Destiny finishes the sentence let's say I grant you all these historical facts. You still haven't substantiated this other historical fact.
Oh, man. Let's see. I'm excited to find out.
Let's see.
Reason, future leadership is still maintaining a lot of popularity throughout most of Ukraine. Let's say that all of that happened, okay, but it was a coup, it was illegal, all that shit. What right does that give Russia to invade Ukraine?
Oh, that's very simple. We should have gotten that for the start. So we talked about the balance of security architecture within Europe, which Ukraine was planning on upsetting with its plans to fucking join NATO. But that alone, you're right, doesn't justify an invasion, which is why Russia kept trying to negotiate with its Western partners for some 8-9 years about this issue, leading to fucking nowhere, to the point where they finally tried to negotiate with Ukraine also about the issue of the Donbass to settle a peace. And Ukraine signed the Minsk agreement to have a ceasefire in the Donbass. As recent as January of 2022, Ukraine made it very clear that it had no intention to implement the Minsk agreement, which said that they would lead to the destruction of our country, and we had to sign it at gunpoint by Russia. Now, finally, Ukraine's continued attacks against the people of the Donbass, they're what amounts to basically a genocide, the constant shelling of civilian infrastructure and the daily terrorism experienced by the people of the Donbass, by Ukraine's armed forces and the Azov battalion. Russia decided to step in finally and recognize the republics. And when those republics became sovereign in Russia's eyes, and Russia did this, by the way.
Wait, can we do this simply instead of rambling about the entire history of the? We're gonna ramble.
When those republics continued to be shelled and attacked after they were recognized,
he's just sprouting up history. Yeah, he does this every time. He can't answer a question.
Yeah. This is the fucking answer. Russia is justified. Russia is justified for no other reason than to protect and guarantee its own security as a country, as well as to
so my question then is
to protect the people of the Donbass.
So my question is, why does the security of Russia supersede the security of the Ukrainian people? When you open this with the quote about how the security of one country,
sure, because the security of the Ukrainian people was never under threat by Russia. It's NATO who is tipping its balance in the opposite
How is the
direction.
security of Russia under threat by NATO?
How is the security of Russia under threat? No, sure. NATO has a history of disrespecting the sovereignty of other countries and invading other countries.
Like Russia does right now with Ukraine?
This is a fucking self-fulfilling prophecy. Russia's doing what it's doing in Ukraine to prevent NATO aggression against Russia. Russia has no plan on forcing.
So why can't Ukraine have legitimate security?
Russia doesn't export its system or its values. NATO does. It's that.
Russia, the Soviet Union absolutely has in the past. Russia's absolutely looking to
Russia is not the Soviet Union. And second of all, the Soviet Union did not fucking export its system by military force. No, it didn't.
It absolutely did.
No, it fucking didn't.
Absolutely.
Name a single example of that.
All three of the Baltics, at the very least.
The Baltics were not taken by the Soviet Union to expand its system, but because it was a form of revanchism for the former territories of the Russian Empire.
The countries were invaded, had their parliament disposed of, and then took votes and held referendums to join the Soviet Union. Sounds similar? Like Crimea. Russia, the Soviet Union has a huge history of doing
public referendum. 96% of
not crazy. How after you get invaded, crazy. Hold on, wait, whoa.
Let's talk about
I can't even finish my question. Finish my question.
You cannot say that.
Let me quickly finish this point about Crimea. 15 seconds. First of all, the people of Crimea made the decision first.
I do want to.
Then the Russian military came.
Hey, come on.
Dylan's been waiting for a long time. I do want to get.
They declared independence before.
Okay, so what's really interesting about the Crimea thing is we keep bringing up the referendum. Jackson, can you tell me what were the options on the referendum?
Oh, the two choices.
They declared independence before the.
Wait, no, Jackson, could you answer that question quick?
They declared independence.
No, I'm asking Jackson a question. I didn't ask. What were the two options? What were the options on the referendum? What were the options on the referendum? What were the two options? What were the two options? Answer my question. What were the two options?
I don't care how you want to construe it.
96% declared. Answer my question. What were the two options?
It was legal.
What were the two options?
The Crimean government.
You're not answering my question.
Dylan, it was because they
can you make him answer my question?
Earlier on,
can you make him answer my question?
Hold on, all right, gentlemen.
You're not going to answer my question. He's dodging. Okay, so the reason it's my time to talk. If he's not answering my question.
Okay, so I want to go back to Dylan. We'll give him a chance. And then we'll give you a chance to answer the question. Jackson, Infra, I've got you.
They had already declared independence.
I've got you on mute.
Okay.
Give me a break here.
So the reason why Jackson isn't answering my question is because the two options, neither of them was joining back with Ukraine. So they
already chose not to do that.
Shut up, please. Jesus Christ. So the reason why a lot of people, including like Crimean Tatars and others, boycotted.
They already declared independence.
Jeez Louise.
The reason why. The reason why
they had already declared independence.
I don't want to say here, there have been times that I've gone on this channel to do debates, and I felt bad later that was I a little bit too strident? Did I interrupt the other guy too much? And I've sent a DM to James to apologize for it. It's I think I went too hard there, but
this kind of puts it all in perspective, doesn't it?
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
James, I can't do it, man.
You can't because you're a they declared independence before Russians came.
They overly rejected
I don't know
government.
how he's unmuting himself. All right, well, let's go to Dylan. You had a question?
Yeah, I never got to finish.
Liar!
I didn't even get to say what
Liar!
I'm lying about. You didn't even let me lie yet. I'm about to lie.
Because they had
Let me
already
lie.
declared independent.
Let me lie. Okay, let me tell my evil Western lies, and then you can like talk later. Okay, so my evil Western lie is that neither of the options on the referendum was to join Ukraine. It was A, join Russia formally, or B, be an independent state heavily influenced by the Russian government.
Is that what it
Those
said,
were the
Dylan?
two.
Is that
that's
exactly
not
what it
That's
said?
not the exact words. It was a lot.
You're
Okay,
fucking James, let me get this point in. I'll stop interrupting.
Jackson, I never. James, if I can't talk.
I really like that Haas is just like psychically unmuted himself just through the power of his rage.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I guess do they have like you've been on this debate platform? You both have, I guess. Is there like a way to unmute? Like, do they use the same thing, Streamlabs or whatever it's called? Or
If there's a way to unmute yourself, I don't know. Like I haven't found it.
I mean, I guess if there is a way within the platform to do it, like Haas has probably spent a lot of time trying to figure it out what it is. That strikes me as a guy who spends a lot of his time being muted. But
yeah.
I can't talk.
That's
I
what
can't
you
debate.
bullshitted about the snipers.
James, I
You're
can't debate
bullshitting
if I
about
can't even
Crimea.
talk. I
This
can't.
entire-
I
All right,
can't.
okay, hold on. What was the question that you had, Dylan? That we do have to go
I
into
don't even
Q&A.
have a question anymore. I'm just trying to say something, and they won't let
Just
me.
let me
because
get
what I'm saying
1
is
point in
uncomfortable for them.
15 seconds.
No, I don't
Because
care.
you made
I don't
shit
care.
up.
Dylan,
I'm not making.
Give me 15 seconds. Give me 15 seconds.
Couldn't answer the question.
He had waited a long time. Dylan will give you a quick, pithy
So,
response, and we got to go to Q&A.
Jackson did not know what the two options on the referendum was. That's why he wouldn't
What
answer my
if,
question, or it was inconvenient to him. But neither of the options
what
was
if, like,
whether
Infrared and Jackson
Crimea could
are
join back
in the same
with
house, and
with
so we can
Ukraine.
just hear
And the
Infrared
problem
voice.
is that I don't care, Has. Please, for the love of God.
They had already formally declared.
Okay, we're going to the Q&A.
Wait, no, James, let me get this last point in. I've been trying to get in.
I never got to finish.
Let me get one last.
No.
10 seconds.
Constantly
Just give
unmuted. You've been
10 seconds.
constantly difficult.
Give me 10 seconds.
No, just find a way to fit it into one of these questions. This one coming in from Ozzy and Talk says, Putin destroyed Russia, and there is no way back from them without Putin stepping down and Russia apologizing.
oh man,
all right.
Ethan, were you trying to jump in and say something there, or maybe you're just unmuted?
Oh yeah, I
Well,
think
I kept trying to mute him, but then like it.
no, I think it would be I think it would be genius if what turned out to be the case is like Jackson Hinkle is like in Haas's like in the room next to Haas, so we can just hear him yelling through Jackson's mic whenever he's muted.
Oh yeah, that would be funny. That would be super funny. Yeah, it's funny. I noticed people in the chat are like, "Please do the Q&A. Please do the Q&A."
No,
I'm
sorry.
It's
but
too
no.
much. It's too much.
I think there's like 40 minutes of Q&A. I'm not doing that. It's already
yeah.
almost 11. That's
Yeah, totally.
I also like I'm gonna have a headache for like 3 days from the part that we just watched. I can't do it.
I know. Oh man, it's quite something, these guys. And yeah, I mean, I think the last debate all three of us did together, I mean, in some ways this is worse, but both suffered from not actually like engaging with the normatively relevant question. At least not even close to sufficiently enough.
Yeah, no,
I mean, at the end, I guess they kind of tried to here, but it didn't really go anywhere.
Yeah. So there was so much screaming. I think I missed what the answer was at the end. Like it was so as you're interpreting them, right? Russia is justified in invading Ukraine because.
Yeah, and like I mean, so it was good that Destiny actually asked that question, but I guess it was because of like that the Minsk agreement or something like that they supposedly promised to like, then they refused to ratify it, and then I guess that meant that maybe, I mean, I'm not really clear on the normative justification, right? Like I feel like, and actually it kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, that there's been a lot of like conflation about there's a lot of conflation between like kind of a strategic causal reason why Russia might invade with the normative reason. Are they justified normatively, right? And like even some people in the chat, I feel like there's that conflation, right? It's like they're not the same thing. Like, I'm sorry, but like giving an account of like why a country might strategically do something is totally different from whether they're normatively justified to do it. And this debate was supposed to be about, is it justified to invade Ukraine? So whether there's a strategic impetus is irrelevant for whether or not it's actually justified normatively.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, you know, you can't, it's fine to say this is like predictable great power behavior to a point. And, you know, so that was a reason not to, you know, to offer, you know, NATO membership to, you know, to the Baltic states, and for, you know, for George Bush to not, you know, then say that, you know, go to Georgia and Ukraine eventually, you know, because that would cause instability because of this. But like, that's a completely different question. Again, I really want to know, like, let's do some, you know, what are the things that gets people to call me a Putin apologist, as they always say, that I think that I think whataboutism is actually not only fine, but is like a moral imperative. Not literal whataboutism, like not, you know, when people are asked to define whataboutism, the definition they'll give you, sure, that's bad, right? You know, that you're like asking what about questions is a way of deflecting from like admitting that something is wrong. But what aboutism means 99.9% of the time in practice, which is just that somebody asked a what about question. You're not allowed to do that, right? You know, that's like that I think is totally fine. It's commendable. Everybody should be doing whataboutism all the time. But that also cuts in any number of different directions. Because again, okay, you know, like Cuba formally joins the Warsaw Pact. The United States invades. Whose side are you on?
Yeah, I mean, I would be against that invasion.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't think that would be a good invasion.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and of course, Cuba never did formally join the Warsaw Pact for exactly that reason, right? You know, because and it's perfectly fine to say, look, here are like foreign policy analysts who predicted that, you know, that this would lead to more conflict if this happened or whatever. That's all fine, but that's just a different question, like you're saying, from does that actually mean the invasion is justified?
Right.
You know, and I don't know, like, I guess as far as I could tell, because it was weird, because there was a point where Haas sounded like he was going to do the Russia is justified in invading the Ukraine because sentence, but then what he ended up just doing was this rambling tour through like the last 20 years of Ukrainian history, and it just there was never like this is the part that justifies it.
Yeah, I mean, that felt like kind of their rhetorical crutch, was just to get bogged down in those historical like minutia.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that what we talked about, I guess, towards the beginning of this is relevant, because like if Haas is making a strategic justification, well, Russia needed to do it because, you know, it was in their military strategic interests. I don't even think that that justification is, even if it were a justification, I don't think that would be really available, because clearly the invasion has not been in Russia's strategic interests. Right. Like clearly there was a different, even if that's part of the story, clearly there's some other motivation that's like playing into it, such as Putin's fear of you know, being humiliated, or of Russia's status not being respected. And clearly you couldn't make a case, well, Ukraine should have just known that they should enact the Minsk agreement so that Russia wouldn't invade them out of a feeling of humiliation. It's like, well, okay. Like, yeah, like even if there are things that Ukraine could have done to prevent the invasion, that doesn't really say anything interesting about how much moral blame they hold, right? Like, you know, if a child could have just prevented their belligerent father from like beating them by doing the dishes, we wouldn't say like, well, you know, there were steps you could have taken, you know.
Exactly. That's a good analogy, I think.
Yeah, and you know, whatever. I mean, if you have like if you're standing off in the living room you know, being like, hey, don't wash those fucking dishes just because he tells you to. No. It's not, you don't have to do that. No, you should totally stand your ground. And then
we made an agreement that you would be doing the dishes. The agreement was made, and now you broke the agreement. So what did you expect was going to happen?
Like, you know, yeah. I mean, look, if there's like a third party like telling you to disobey your abusive father and not do the dishes, and then like not helping you, you know, when your father starts beating you. I mean, I do think that third party is like doing something irresponsible.
I'm never going to do business with your father again. Never writing him another check.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, again, it's just so weird. Like, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a clusterfuck of a debate because they don't like, there's no, I mean, what Destiny and Dylan are doing is much less bad because they're just kind of, you know, responded for the most part. Although I also think that they very much like the Richard Wolff debate, that Destiny and Dylan are defending a bunch of stuff they didn't need to defend.
Yeah, exactly. And I will, to give Destiny a tiny bit of credit, though, at least he was the only person who actually did the thing that we were wishing somebody would do, which is like granting all that. You know, why does that even matter?
Yes. Yeah, no, totally. But it's like, look, you don't need to argue that, you know, that there aren't that many Nazis in Ukraine. You know, you certainly don't need to argue that like all of the U.S. funding, you know, for projects in Ukraine was for benevolent purposes. Like, you don't need to do any of that, right? Yeah. Like, because none of that matters for what you're actually talking about. Like, you know, just like you can maybe note in passing, it's like, yeah, I think some of these claims, you know, are a little dubious or whatever, but like, do not get bogged down for half an hour arguing about, you know, what different, like, you know, God, was it the New Citizens that Jackson Hinkle kept like screaming, you know, it's like, no, it's the New Citizens. I told you it's the new, I never even found out what the New Citizens was, you know, but like, I guess that's a group that got some funding that was later involved in, you know, Maidan. But, and yeah, look, is it ridiculous that they're making this big one-sided deal about neo-Nazis in Ukraine when, you know, Putin's government has supported far-right parties in many other countries, you know, when it undermines, you know, his you know, geostrategic enemies? Like, it is, but like, that's not really the main point, right? I mean, you don't need to get into an hour on which country has more Nazis, you know, like you just need to ask, like, okay, what's the principle that takes us from their Nazis there to it's fine to invade?
That debate should have just been called which country has more Nazis, like Russia or Ukraine. That was
I can actually imagine that as a modern day debate topic. You know, it's like, all right, you know, thank you, Dr. Ben, thank you, you know, Justin. All right, tomorrow we're going to be debating Russia and Ukraine. Which country has more Nazis?
Totally.
I mean, per capita, to be fair.
Per capita, of course. It has to be
obviously, you got to do it per capita. If you're doing just raw numbers of Nazis, that would be ridiculous. Like, then,
of course.
You know, I mean, yeah, right. That's like, then, like, you know, China has more Nazis, you know, than Ukraine. You know, like it's, you know, it's going to throw the calculations all off, right? You're just saying, like, how many Nazis per capita? Are these young Nazis, or are these like Nazi pensioners who are about to die anyway, so they don't matter very much?
Yeah.
Like,
are they even real Nazis? Maybe they just like to marginalize gay people, but they don't care about the Jewish stuff. You know,
yeah,
it's like,
each statue counts for like 100 Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually, this is maybe too big of a question, but I'm curious about it because I don't know if I don't have a thought out view on this, but I guess I was thinking, you know, what do you guys think justifies an invasion, right? Like what, like, you know, because what would actually justify like a first strike invasion? Obviously there's like an invasion that might come as a result of like being on the defense, right? To like take back stuff that was taken
at the,
yeah, exactly. Like, you know, whatever it was, the beach, you know, the beaches at Normandy or whatever to retake France or something like that, right? But like, what's actually like justifies entry into it? Like, I don't know what those conditions would be. It's not clear to me. It seems like a very high bar for me, at least. I'm just not sure how I would describe it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be an extremely high bar. I'm also fairly comfortable not having like a sufficient condition in my back pocket that if you meet this threshold, you can evade. I think the real thing is just that there should be an incredibly strong presumption against it, and that you just need an amazing argument to justify invading a whole country, because that's just so unbelievably prima facie wrong. That it has to be
like mass genocide, maybe like demonstrable mass genocide, maybe
stuff like that, I would think.
Yeah, and maybe one reason for setting the bar so high, it's kind of similar like I was telling Victor before we started, I've been reading a lot of Parfit recently, and Parfit makes this point in Reasons and Persons where he's like, look, it's probably good, even if sometimes murder might be okay, it's probably good for you to cause yourself to believe that murder is never okay, because if you believe that murder is sometimes okay, you'll be very liable to convince yourself that this instance of murder is okay, even when it's not, just because you really want to murder. And I think a similar thing goes with like, if we set the precedent that states are allowed to invade, even if we set conditions that seem like, oh yeah, that seems like morally obvious, the danger is that states then start to invade using that justification when it's not applicable because they have other motives.
Yeah, right. That seems right. Like, because I think that might be a good reason not to want it to be like a mechanistic, like here's a checklist and you meet the you tick off enough boxes and you can invade, right? Because like, okay, genocide, like if anything's going to be like, okay, that's the trigger, that would be it, right? That's
and even in that circumstance, I would say that like it still wouldn't be justified to like install your own government, really, or something. It would just be like justified insofar as preventing the genocide, I feel like, and then leaving or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's also tricky because I think at this point, everybody should be able to think of lots of examples where what exactly rises to the bar of genocide is a tricky contested issue. I mean, look at the debates about whether the human rights abuses against Uyghurs in China count as a form of genocide, or for that matter, whether Canada's crimes against the native population count as a form of genocide. Is Saddam Hussein's chemical weapons attacks on the Kurdish population, like they're people who wanted to throw around the genocide word there. Like it sounds like a really easy, really clear bar. If what you have in mind when you hear the word genocide is like classical full on like World War II industrialized extermination camps. Like if that's what's in your head, right? That it sounds like, yeah, sure, of course, right? But like, given that it is such a messy category, it's probably better not to just be like, well, anything once you've made your case that it like matches the category, right? That it's justified. It should probably be more like, it's just there is a crazy strong presumption against it, and then like. Maybe you just find yourself shocked to understand that under this circumstance you can actually see it, but like it's like I guess to the Parfit point, it's like torture, right? That I think very few of us are probably really absolutists about it under every conceivable circumstance. That like. I mean, the ticking time bomb thing is silly for a variety of reasons, right? Like it's unrealistic in lots of ways, whatever. But like, could you actually construct a scenario where if somebody, there's like, it was some crazy set of circumstances, and there's the suitcase nuke, and blah 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 blah, right? That they have like. The three of us would all be okay with it, and like would like think that like somebody who did that like hadn't done something wrong. Sure. But
No, but it's a good analogy too, because I actually was thinking about like how torture also, or torture maps on well, because I was thinking about how, well, maybe if it's enhanced interrogation techniques, just like it's not an invasion, maybe if it's a special military operation, it's okay, right? Anyway, sorry.
No, well, yeah. I mean, obviously, if you have security concerns, you can do special military operation. That's not even what we're talking about. But you know, invasion, you need the genocide. No, but like even so, right? Like even though, sure, could we come up with science fiction scenario where none of us would really be against, you know, like some form of, you know, something that, you know, like something that should reasonably be counted as torture that we wouldn't be against in context, sure. But like torture should just be flatly illegal, right?
Mhm.
You know, like people who like Alan Dershowitz, I remember at one point in like the real sort of deep years of post 9/11 madness was suggested that, you know, there should be like torture warrants, you know, where you could like meet some evidence, your threshold, and, you know, you can just have a judge say it's okay, go ahead and torture, right? That's not how you want it to work. The way you want it to work is like, it's just flatly, absolutely illegal. And then I guess if some super crazy science fiction scenario happens, then okay, one, in that scenario, you might be willing to just take your prison time, you know, because it's worth it to you, right? You know, but maybe not, you know, maybe we'll even like, if we're on that jury, maybe we even don't vote to convict. But I mean, like, you know, you do not want that written into the law. And I think something structurally analogous is probably true for like invading an entire country, you know, sending troops in when they didn't start a war with you to like march into their capital and overthrow their government, install a new one, all that stuff. It's like maybe there is a set of circumstances under which we'd be okay with that, but let's not try to like codify here are the boxes you want to check.
Right, because because it's like, you know, to get to the torture analogy, like there's two separate questions. Like one, is torture conceivably ever good? The answer to that is plausibly yes. And then the second question is, do we want the police arbitrating when torture is deemed good enough to engage in? And the answer to that is like probably not. So it's probably, you know, better, all things considered, to just have a blanket ban.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. Something similar should go for invasion.
Well, I see someone in the chat like suggesting the next modern day debate topic should be: is Parfit or Lewis the king of thought experiments?
That's a good topic. I would do that debate.
Yeah. Which side are you on?
I would probably take Parfit's side.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know,
Are you as familiar with Lewis?
I'm not as familiar with Lewis as with Parfit. I think Lewis was probably more innovative, if I'm being honest, just in terms of, you know, the contributions he made in terms of counterfactuals and so on. But I think Parfit's a lot more exciting. Like, I'm way more interested in whether there are reasons than in whether there are possible worlds, you know.
And brain beaming machines to Mars.
Yeah.
I mean, that
stuff.
Yeah. I like the Lewis time travel paper a lot.
Yeah.
But you know, it's funny actually. I never met Derek Parfit, but I was like I was pretty good friends at one point at Rutgers with one of his housemates. So I had so there were like I think a good number of nights where like after the bar closed, I was like over there like drinking whiskey in the living room while he was like sleeping in the next room. You know, feel bad that I never actually took the opportunity to
wake
meet
him
the
up
guy,
and be like, "Wake up, come drink with us."
Yeah. Well, had we only known, but that was my, you know, I remember thinking that was bizarre watching The Good Place. Because that was Parfit was one of the names on Chini's whiteboard. It's like, oh yeah, that guy's living room bunch.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I still, you know, I think it would have been worth trying doing negotiations with, you know, future NATO status, Ukrainian neutrality on the table to prevent things from escalating to this point. I don't want us to start World War III. I am queasy about some sanctions. I'm okay with like sanctioning individual oligarchs, but like I'm I'm not comfortable with inflicting, misery on ordinary people
population.
who don't get to decide, who have even less input into their country's foreign policy than we have into ours. So I retain all of my Putin apologist positions, but
Yeah.
I have to say, Haas and Hinkle have not convinced me that it was actually justified for Russia to invade
Surprising,
Ukraine.
very surprising.
Surprising. Yeah, I know that's like a shock, ruling at the end of this, but I
Our
have
infrared
to
had
say,
such articulate, well thought out arguments, though.
Someone in chat suggested that the next stream we should all debate Haas on any subject.
have him like pulling his microphone to his face and screaming and unmuting himself.
It's quite the spectacle. It really is quite the spectacle.
Yeah, no, I actually would be curious. Like, are there things that you could just debate with that guy and just be a normal debate?
Yeah.
Or is this just his one register? Like, yeah. So there you go. I still think invading the country is bad. Better luck next time, guys.
Also, the on the point about sanctions too, I was going to say that a lot of the political science research, as far as I understand it, seems to show that they don't really work. Right. Like in terms, like when you sanction the population, if the motive is to like get them to turn on their leader, it usually has the opposite effect. Apparently, like when it affects the regular everyday people, that is.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, like if somebody was saying that the college show, somebody who's partner is from Russia, and he was talking about conversations with her family and stuff, and that like anecdotally they were expressing something like that, right? That like right after the invasion, there was actually like a pretty shockingly big anti-war movement started in Russia, but you can really see how all this could like take the wind out of the sails of that, right? Because like the more you're suffering, and whatever, it pales next to the suffering of the Ukrainians, but still, right? The more you're suffering in a way that like everybody can kind of see is linked to things that that Western powers are doing, like the harder it is to be the guy who like wants to like sit in the public square and get arrested, like for doing what we'll read to people as taking the side of these external enemies who are imposing all this on you. So I think I think that, again, useful whataboutism, if in 2003, if other powers had been in a position to seize some yachts and free some assets belonging to Rumsfeld and Shady and the top executives at Halliburton, I would have been for it. But I think that's the prism that you need to ask the sanctions question through, right? Like is would you actually support sanctions that would just indiscriminately affect ordinary Americans? Like, would you support that morally and also strategically, like you're talking about? I mean, do you actually think that would cause people to be less supportive of Bush in the war, or do you think that would plausibly have the opposite effect and make them rally around the flag even more than people were already?
Yep.
Yeah, I will say I think one of the justifications I've heard floated for the broader sanctions is this idea that like, if we completely cripple Russia's financial system, then they'll no longer be able to, make the sort of payments that they're going to need in order to sustain their military system. And I think that's kind of sketchy, but I think that that's like, if someone were to make a case for general sanctions, I think it would be something along those lines.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think it's hard to imagine how that wouldn't have an effect. Like, I mean, if those soldiers are getting paid in rubles and the ruble's worth like a penny, it's just like, it's hard to imagine how that wouldn't affect morale, but maybe it would make them more angry at America, or I don't know.
Yeah, my understanding is the ruble penny thing is a little bit misleading because it was before the war started. It was like it was like 1.3 pennies.
Oh, really? Was it that low? I thought it was like 20 cents.
Okay, I might be wrong about this, but that was my understanding, that it's like that. So like, it is still a big decline. I mean, it's like that's like whatever, I guess not quite 30%, but like a big decline. But it's not, you know, I don't think it's as big a decline as people think it is. But yeah, I mean, look, I think that, you know, I know people, I mean, it's a little bit like the torture thing, I guess, you know, if you could come up with a scenario where I was convinced that it would like really, really work, and the thing that would work in preventing was like sufficiently awful, right? Would I think that was justified, even if it like really hurt like millions and millions of ordinary working class people? Yeah, it'd certainly be a dilemma, right? You know, but like I also don't spend a lot of time like sweating about it because I'm not convinced that this dilemma has actually come up, you know, meaningfully. And I think that I think a lot of this stuff also assumes that I think would only make sense if the world were still unipolar to a much greater extent than, you know, than it is right now, right? Like China exists. And so if you just like, you know, kicking the Russians off SWIFT and, you know, and like all this stuff, like isn't necessarily like, I mean, it's definitely going to impose a lot of pain, but like whether long-term that's going to actually be inconsistent with the ability to wage war, or, you know, whether like all of that oil is just going to go to waste and they're not going to find anybody who wants it, you know, we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And then all that stuff about like the planes, the Polish planes. I don't know where that's at. I didn't check the news on that, but that seemed like at the edge of things that seem a little bit too provocative to me. I don't know. I was a little bit unsure about that.
So the last I heard about the planes is that basically it was Poland and one other country I thought was like that the U.S. was like trying to get them to give the planes to Ukraine, and they were like, we're not going to do that, right? Like, you know, you guys, like, you want us to give it to you, and you can give it to them. You know,
yes,
go nuts,
exactly.
Right? You know, like we'll do that, but
then that's when the U.S. was like, no, we're not going to do that.
yeah, because like basically nobody actually wanted to escalate to that point, which is a very good thing.
Yeah.
Because, you know, even though it's a very fine line, like why is it that the fighter jets are that much big of an escalation compared to, you know, anti-tank guns or whatever, like still something about like flying in the fighter jets to use directly in the war. You know, it's a judgment call, but I could definitely see why that would be too much of an escalation. Never mind. I mean, the really insane thing is all the people saying that we should, you know, do a no-fly zone, which literally just means go to war with Russia.
Yeah,
lunacy, absolute lunacy. Yeah.
So
I see why the Ukrainians want it, but it's that they just want us to end, or they want, I shouldn't say us, they want the United States, NATO to enter the war.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I'm just worried, like that. This
they really want Canada to enter. That's what they're mostly for.
Yeah, I'm just worried that like this conflict drags on, and then like, you know, Trump gets reelected, and then like depending on how Putin looked at him at their last meeting, we're either going to be going to war with Russia or going to war with Ukraine. It's just unclear which one.
I feel like this is good for Biden. I feel like this is good for Biden. Don't you think? Maybe. I mean, it's hard to tell. I guess we're so far out.
Yeah.
I think the conflict itself has been. I think the resulting surge in oil prices is going to be bad for Biden.
Yeah. Right. That's true.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that's absolutely true about Trump. I think that there is just no telling, you know, like what you would be doing right now, because on the one hand, like he sometimes did things that would go with the America First, you know, right-wing isolationist branded, you know, like entering into peace talks with North Korea, but then he also did things that were like way more militaristic and crazy than anything that Obama ever did, like assassinated Soleimani.
Yeah.
So I think it's literally just like what mood he was in that day. Who was the last person who talked to him? You know, is like, did Ivanka get in there? You know, before or after? You know, Steve Bannon. It's. So yes, I do think, and I also think even compared to other centrist Democrats, I mean, we probably are like better off, you know, with Grandpa Biden than with like some of the others, just in terms of his demonstrated, you know, I mean, like whatever. I mean, Joe Biden sucks. You know, he has like he spent a career voting for wars, whatever. You know, like it's certainly not like he's a principled anti-imperialist or anything, but he does seem to have a demonstrated willingness to like make kind of clear-eyed calculations about what interest would or wouldn't be served by doing something that Hawks want him to do. And then when he decides it's like, no, this would be a dumb idea. Like he does seem to have this demonstrated willingness to just stick to his guns. I mean, like I was very happy, but very shocked when he stuck out the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Like even when like there was like 2 weeks of being crucified in the press for that. It's like, but, you know, this is stupid. Let's not do this.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if some of the conservative Trumpers like had a point about Trump being like too scary for like Putin to do anything. Like, because it's like, I mean, you're just going to your point. Like, there is an argument to be made that like if you're Putin and you're just like, if we do this, so I just have no idea what Trump's going to do in response to that. Like, or I have like the kind of like spectrum of options is a lot wider for what could happen. So like from a Putin perspective, I could imagine being like, well, maybe let's wait till Trump leaves to like do something like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's super bizarre. I mean, like Trump's temperament. I mean, I just it's really just. I mean, it's hard to predict like what he would do in a situation like this, and in part it's because I feel like the way he acts is so influenced by how he thinks people see him at a given point in time that like at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Trump was like, oh, this is, you know, Putin's doing a great job. What a smart guy. And then people started saying they never would have invaded if Trump were in office. And Trump was like, yeah, that's right. They never would have invaded if I were in office. And all of a sudden he gets aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny because that argument that that they wouldn't have invaded Trump was in office because he's so crazy and unpredictable.
Stable genius.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because in a way, right? I mean, that's like the Nixon thing, you know, the madman theory, but it's also possibly, I mean, one way of reading like what the thinking is behind Putin actually invading, you know, it's like it's like, hey, ultimately, if we're going to be taken seriously as a major player in the global system, we just have to show that we're willing to shoot the hostage. You know, that's like, it doesn't matter how bad the consequences are. You know, like we'll just go for it, and like we have to be exactly this unconstrained and unpredictable. You know, for people to be worried about messing with us in the future.
Yeah.
Oh, well, on that happy note, everybody should watch Victor Bruzone at Plastic Pills. Listen to that podcast. It does with a couple of people, including our good friend and very frequent guest, Matt McManus. And people should watch Ethan, better known by his YouTube sobriquet Mouthy Infidel.
But now it's called Electrons in Love.
At his channel Electrons in Love, where he does stuff like make video essays about Derek Parfit, which is just a unfathomably more wholesome thing to do with YouTube than what we just watched. So good for you, man. But with that, we should probably leave it there for tonight. Remember, if they try to mute you, just keep screaming and trying shit until you've unmuted yourself.
Mute myself right now, yeah.
All right. Left is best.